The earth is in a blaze. The world is in a maze. The way of life today is strange and odd. What happened across the sea may come to you and me. Oh, come, let us go back to God, go back to God.
Come on,
let's go back to God.
let us go back.
Let's go back to God.
Come on,
Let's go back to God.
let us go
Let's
back
to God.
I know the way
Let's go back to God.
without my Lord.
Let's go back to God.
Mighty
Let's
hard.
go back to God.
Oh
Let's
yes.
go back to God.
Then I know death
Let's
has
go back to God.
marked the path.
go back to
Yes,
God.
death is
Let's
marked.
go back to God.
A path we
Let's
trod.
go back to God.
Come on,
Let's go back
yes,
to God.
let us go
Let's
back.
to God.
Go back to God.
Let's go back to God. There's trouble in the air. Destruction is everywhere, and men are being tramped beneath the soil, and nations great and small have now begun to fall. Oh, come, let us go back to God. Let's go back to God.
I say to them tonight, there is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America. There is not a black America and a white America and Latino America and Asian America. There's the United States of America. The pundits like to slice and dice our country into red states and blue states. Red states for Republicans, blue states for Democrats. But I've got news for them too. We worship an awesome God in the blue states, and we don't like federal agents poking around in our libraries in the red states. We coach Little League in the blue states, and yes, we've got some gay friends in the red states. There are patriots who opposed the war in Iraq, and there are patriots who supported the war in Iraq. We are one people, all of us pledging allegiance to the Stars and Stripes, all of us defending the United States of America.
Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
I think we make a mistake when we fail to acknowledge the power of faith in people's lives, in the lives of the American people. I think it's time that we join a serious debate about how to reconcile faith with our modern pluralistic society. The single biggest gap in party affiliation among white Americans today is not between men and women, or those who reside in so-called red states and those who reside in blue, but between those who attend church regularly and those who don't.
Montgomery was a community predominantly church-centered, so that it was very easy to get to the vast majority of Negroes because they were in some way connected with a church in the community.
Whatever we once were, we are no longer a Christian nation. We are also a Jewish nation, a Muslim nation, and a Buddhist nation, and a Hindu nation, and a nation of non-believers. And even if we did have only Christians in our midst, if we expelled every non-Christian from the United States of America, whose Christianity would we teach in the schools? Would it be James Dobson's or Al Sharps's? Which passages of Scripture should guide our public policy? Should we go with Leviticus, which suggests slavery is okay, and that eating shellfish is an abomination? Or we could go with Deuteronomy, which suggests stoning your child if he strays from the faith? Or should we just stick to the Sermon on the Mount, a passage that is so radical that it's doubtful that our own Defense Department would survive its application?
The nonviolence always end up with violence, or almost always, Dr. King. Doesn't this crisis atmosphere create or endanger the Negro's cause by creating among the whites a resentment, a feeling? Does this worry you, that this atmosphere could be created, or is?
Well, I think this is a temporary response in any social revolution.
Or doesn't it hurt your cause?
I don't think so ultimately. I think it helps it in the final analysis. The only way people can grapple with their prejudices is to admit that they have them. And so often people don't realize they have them. And it is necessary in the nonviolent movement to bring the issue to the surface so that people are forced to deal with it and to deal with their conscience on the issue.
When I think about America, I think about both where we've been, where we might be going. I'm reminded of Dr. King's speech, the famous speech he gave shortly before he got shot about, I might not get there with you, but I've been to the mountaintop and I see the promised land. And I think that that idea that we're not where we need to be, but we still act on the faith and the belief that we can get there. That's how I think about America. That's how I think about my own political journey. It's not one where it's ever going to be finished. It's not one where racism is gone or inequality is gone. But we can continually try to do better, and that was the spirit that I wanted to communicate in the book.
I think the greatest victory of this period was not in terms of an external factor or an external development, but it was something internal. The real victory was what this period did to the psyche of the black man. The greatness of this period was that we armed ourselves with dignity and self-respect.
How do you take it when you hear, especially African Americans and minorities, say that they feel that President Barack didn't do enough for minorities, didn't do enough for black people?
Black people.
I was very confident in what I had done for black folks because I had the statistics to prove it. By the time I left office, you had seen 3 million African Americans have health care that didn't have it before. You had seen the incarceration rate, the number of black folks in prison, drop for the first time in years. You had seen the juvenile correction system, 30% fewer people in there. Black poverty dropped to its lowest level since 1968. Black businesses rise. You had seen black income go up. So I could just look at the data and I could say millions of black folks were better off at the time I left office than when I came in. And what I have to accept is the fact that, okay, so I got 20 million people health care, but there's still 10 million out there who don't have health care because Republicans blocked me from doing everything I wanted to do with Obamacare, because some states didn't accept Medicaid dollars, even though it wasn't going to cost them a dime, just because they wanted to oppose me. If you were black and you're one of those 10 million who didn't get health care because they were living in a state that didn't accept the money we were giving them, I can understand why they would be upset. How come things didn't change?
I think people want to know, like, what did you do specifically for black people? Not the rising tide lifts all boats types of rhetoric, because we all know black people's boat got a hole in it. So the systemic things that were done to black people to put us in these positions, we need specific systemic things to get us out. So what did you do in that regard?
What I'm saying, Charlemagne, is black poverty dropped faster than everybody else. Black incomes went up more than a lot of other folks. The issue is sometimes we just didn't go around advertising that, because the goal here is to build coalitions where everybody is getting something so that they all feel like they've got a stake in it.
Aren't you thus creating a crisis rather than working toward a solution?
It is necessary to create a problem in order to get to the real solution of the problem. I think the meaning or the reason for direct action in some situations is to create a situation so crisis-packed that a community that has consistently refused to negotiate will be forced to deal with the issue and to negotiate.
It's a tradition that I'm proud to uphold, not only as a fellow believer, but as an elected leader whose entry into public service was actually through the church. My mother, whose parents were Baptist and Methodist, grew up with a certain skepticism about organized religion. And she usually only took me to church on Easter and Christmas. And yet my mother was also one of the most spiritual people that I ever knew. She was somebody who was instinctively guided by the golden rule and who nagged me constantly about the homespun values of her Kansas upbringing. Despite the absence of a formal religious upbringing, my earliest inspirations for a life of service ended up being the faith leaders of the civil rights movement. And there was, of course, Martin Luther King and the Baptist leaders, the ways in which they helped those who had been subjugated to make a way out of no way and transform a nation, is what led me, just a few years out of college, to sign up as a community organizer for a group of churches on the south side of Chicago. And it was through that experience, working with pastors and lay people, trying to heal the wounds of hurting neighborhoods, that I came to know Jesus Christ for myself and embrace Him as my Lord and Savior.
It's a hard, it's a tedious job at times to get people to be aroused from their apathetic slumbers, but I still feel that Negroes in the North can be motivated just as they were motivated in the South. And I think as time goes on with the growing economic deprivation in the Negro community, it will even be easier, because people will come to see that not only is something wrong in general, but something is wrong in particular in their own economic and housing situations.
There's only so much a church can do to help all the families in need, all those who need help making a mortgage payment or avoiding foreclosure or making sure their child can go to college. There's only so much that a nonprofit can do to help a community rebuild in the wake of disaster. There's only so much the private sector will do to help folks who are desperately sick get the care that they need. And that's why I continue to believe that in a caring and in a just society, government must have a role to play. That our values, our love, and our charity must find expression not just in our families, not just in our places of work and our places of worship, but also in our government and in our politics.
And we haven't been able to be people. We haven't been men because of all of the conditions that we've lived with and the syndrome of deprivation surrounding conditions, whether it's in housing, in the economic area, or in schools, or in the vicious credit practices that we face in the ghetto, and all of the problems of closed doors and constant defeats. But in spite of all this, I think we all know, basically, that we want to be men. We want to be persons judged not on the basis of the color of our skin, but on the basis of the content of our character.
When I talk about our financial institutions playing by the same rules as folks on Main Street, making sure insurance companies aren't discriminating against those who are already sick, unscrupulous lenders aren't taking advantage of the most vulnerable among us, I do so because I genuinely believe it'll make the economy stronger for everybody, but I also do it because I believe in God's command to love thy neighbor as thyself. I know that a version of that golden rule is found in every major religion, and every set of beliefs, from Hinduism to Islam to Judaism to the writings of Plato. If I'm willing to give something up as somebody who's been extraordinarily blessed and give up some of the tax breaks that I enjoy, I actually think that's going to make economic sense. But for me as a Christian, it also coincides with Jesus' teaching that for unto whom much is given, much shall be required.
There are those who still feel that if the Negro is to rise out of poverty, if the Negro is to rise out of slum conditions, if he is to rise out of discrimination and segregation, he must do it all by himself. And so they say the Negro must lift himself by his own bootstraps. But beyond this, they never stop to realize the debt that they owe a people who were kept in slavery 244 years. But the nation failed to do anything for the black man. The very thing that our nation did to the black man, it simply said you're free, and it left him there penniless, illiterate, not knowing what to do.
From every family who never imagined that their loved one would be taken from our lives by a bullet from a gun. Every time I think about those kids, it gets me mad. And by the way, it happens on the streets of Chicago every day. So, all of us need to demand a Congress brave enough to stand up to the gun lobby's lies. All of us need to stand up and protect its citizens. All of us need to demand governors and legislators and businesses do their part to make our communities safer.
This is America's opportunity to help bridge the gulf between the haves and the have-nots. And the question is whether America will do it. There's nothing new about poverty. What is new is that we now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty. But the real question is whether we have the will.
I know faith is often used as a wedge in our politics. In a democracy like ours, there will always be disagreements on important issues. But the American people should know this. In a changing world, my commitment to protecting religious liberty is and always will be unwavering. As America's religious diversity grows, we have the chance to reaffirm the pluralism that has defined us as a nation. E pluribus una, out of many one, has never suggested that the goal of this nation is uniformity of belief, but that for all of our differences, we are committed to looking out for one another and for the welfare of future generations. We're greater together than we are on our own. These shared moral obligations have guided me as president. When we took action to rescue the auto industry, on health care reform, on issues like education, poverty, and immigration, I'm standing on the side of human dignity and a belief in the inherent worth of all human beings. I'm asking for your support because we have more work to do. to build an economy where families are valued and secure, and to expand opportunity, extend compassion, and pursue the common good. Visit barackobama.com/faith and let us know that you're in. Then let your family, friends, and fellow believers know why you are supporting this campaign.
I think we've got to see that a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the economic plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last few years.
How many summers like this one do you imagine that we can expect?
Well, I would say this: we don't have long. The mood of the Negro community now is one of urgency. I think the answer about how long it will take will depend on the federal government, on the city halls of our various cities, and on white America to a large extent. This is where we are at this point, and I think white America will determine how long it will be and which way we go in the future.
I send my thoughts and prayers, as well as Michelle's, to the family of Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin could have been me 35 years ago. When you think about why, in the African American community at least, there's a lot of pain around what happened here, I think it's important to recognize that the African American community is looking at this issue through a set of experiences and a history that doesn't go away. There are very few African American men in this country who haven't had the experience of being followed when they were shopping in a department store. That includes me. Those sets of experiences inform how the African American community interprets what happened one night in Florida. Violence that takes place in poor black neighborhoods around the country is born out of a very violent past in this country, and that the poverty and dysfunction that we see in those communities can be traced to a very difficult history. And so the fact that sometimes that's unacknowledged adds to the frustration.
We must come to see that the roots of racism are very deep in our country. And there must be something positive and massive in order to get rid of all of the effects of racism and the tragedies of racial injustice.
Hopefully, the legacy of this tragedy is not just outrage, but something constructive. And that doesn't fill the hole that Trayvon's parents feel. This country can do better. My hope is that we look back on what happened with Trayvon and are able to say that that was the start of America looking inward. And in fits and starts, coming to terms with what has always been our original sin.
There has never been a single, solid, determined commitment of large segments of white America on the whole question of racial equality. Many of the people who supported us in Selma, in Birmingham, were really outraged about the extremist behavior toward Negroes. But they were not at that moment, and they are not now, committed to genuine equality for Negroes. It's much easier to integrate a lunch counter than it is to guarantee an annual income, for instance, to get rid of poverty for Negroes and all poor people. It's much easier to integrate a bus than it is to make genuine integration a reality and quality education a reality in our schools. It's much easier to integrate even a public park than it is to get rid of slums. And I think we are in a new era, a new phase of the struggle, where we have moved from a struggle for decency, which characterized our struggle for 10 or 12 years, to a struggle for genuine equality. And this is where we are getting the resistance, because there was never any intention to go this far. People were reacting to Bull Connor and to Jim Clark rather than acting in good faith for the realization of genuine equality.
50 years after Dr. King talked about his dream for America's children, the stubborn fact is that the life chances of the average black or brown child in this country lags behind by almost every measure, and is worse for boys and young men. If you're African American, there's about 1 in 2 chance you grow up without a father in your house. 1 in 2. If you're Latino, you have about 1 in 4 chance. We know that boys who grow up without a father are more likely to be poor, more likely to underperform in school. As a black student, you are far less likely than a white student to be able to read proficiently by the time you are in 4th grade. By the time you reach high school, you're far more likely to have been suspended or expelled. There's a higher chance you end up in the criminal justice system, and a far higher chance that you are the victim of a violent crime. Fewer young black and Latino men participate in the labor force compared to young white men. And all of this translates into higher unemployment rates and poverty rates as adults. These statistics should break our hearts, and they should compel us to act.
This is America's opportunity to help bridge the gulf between the haves and the have-nots. And the question is whether America will do it. There's nothing new about poverty. What is new is that we now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty. But the real question is whether we have the will.
As a Christian, I am supposed to love. And I have to say that sometimes when I listen to less than loving expressions by Christians, I get concerned. But that's a topic for another day.
We need not despair. We need not despair because we are on the side of right. And if you are right, God will fight your battle. This is our faith, and this is what we live by.
Pluralism works better when it is about action and not just words. I am a 63-year-old African-American man, but I am also a husband. I am a father. I am a Christian who is constantly wrestling with his doubts about organized religion. I am a writer.
As America's first black president prepares to leave office, these protesters want to keep civil rights in the spotlight. Even after 8 years of Obama, there's still plenty of work to do.
Unfortunately, when they elected Obama president, black people mistakenly thought that meant that this country was more tolerant of different races. But we saw over the past 8 years that it just made some people that were probably inherently racist upset, and all those people came bubbling to the top. So there's a lot of tension in this country right now.
Back in 2008, many hoped that Obama's election was a sign that America was putting its charged racial past of slavery and segregation behind it. But the president himself now acknowledges that this was unrealistic.
After my election, there was talk of a post-racial America. And such a vision, however well intended, was never realistic. Race remains a potent and often divisive force in our society.
That ticks me off a little bit. In the year 2016, I've got to be in Washington, D.C., in front of the White House with our first black president, with my child protesting something that I thought was done.
At first, Obama rarely talked about race, but with the issue in the headlines, he gradually found his voice, acknowledging real grievances in black communities. One of his most emotional speeches followed a mass shooting by a white supremacist at a black church in South Carolina.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
For civil rights campaigner Jesse Jackson, expecting Obama's presidency to bring an end to racism was always unrealistic, and division will continue to plague US society.
We're trying to become post-racist, not post-racial. We are a multiracial, multicultural society, so post-racist is the objective. But there are racists who benefit from racism. They benefit from walls. When walls up, they can maneuver people behind the wall. Behind the wall, when walls separate us, is ignorance and fear and hatred and violence.
Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to another episode of Cutting Through the Culture. I am one of your hosts, Quisha King, and welcome. So we're going to be talking about who was worse, MLK or Barack Hussein Obama. So I had posed this question to our group chat earlier in the week, and we decided to do a video on it. I think my preliminary thoughts on this is that I think Barack Obama was worse in the idea that he was able to sort of solidify what King did. I mean, like, things got worse over time, so he was kind of like naturally worse to me. But I think he was also able to use the tools that we have today with social media and just his timing that he came about. I just think it made him a more harmful to America than MLK did. But I think they were both terrible. And Chad is not going to be with us tonight. He is still traveling. So you guys wish him traveling mercies and pray for him and his family while he is away. But that is my preliminary thought on it. And Chad said that he believes that MLK is worse. I'll find his quote for you, so his idea can at least be considered in the conversation. But to fill in, so there's four of us. We have with us tonight a guest. You're going to love another lady to join us. Very, very happy. Miss Jambalaya Talks. How are you? Okay. You're muted. You're muted. Can you unmute?
I'm doing great. Good to see you, Quisha. You look beautiful, and congratulations on your marriage.
Thank you. You look great.
Oh,
good to see you.
You're muted. Oh.
Can you unmute?
I'm doing great. Good to see you, Quisha. You look beautiful.
Oh, wait. What am I hearing? I'm hearing it's like feedback.
You're muted. Oh. Can you unmute? I'm doing great. Good to see you.
Okay, I'm gonna mute you because I can hear everything I'm saying through your yeah. So we'll come back to you, but I'm going to bring up Mr. Teachum Chuck, who disappeared and came back, but I see you were watching the montage. So what are your thoughts? How are you? And what are your thoughts on this? Who do you think was worse?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. Yeah, I'm going to have to go with King, only because, I mean, Barack Obama, I think even when you and Blanche and Chad in our group chat, I was watching the conversation. I didn't say anything. I was reading comments you guys were making. And I'm going to have to agree with Chad's sentiment. I can't remember exactly what he said. I remember Blanche chiming in, and Blanche said that, what did he say? He said that Barack Obama is merely a Democrat. MLK is seen as a savior. And so that really resonated with me, just, real simple and concise. Because MLK, he's captured both, um, left and so-called right. He is the epitome, the pillar of this perfect American, or at least an American who, in his public deeds, and even to the extent that people are even willing to acknowledge his private life, people will say, well, whatever, it is what it is, right? No one's perfect, right? That's the old cliche you hear being bandied about. And they say, but what he represented, the symbol that is MLK, his sort of vision of America is what the founding fathers and what the framers had in mind when they thought up this idea of an America. And King represented that dream, right? That dream of George Washington and John Hancock and George Mason and John Adams and and Madison. He is that. That is King, and nothing could be further from the truth. And so that's why I go with King, because Barack Obama is still a very divisive, a very polarizing figure, right? I mean, and I won't say that he was always a polarizing figure, but he certainly became one as his presidency went on, throughout his two presidencies, especially even after his first presidency. I mean, the whole cat was out of the bag, as they say. So that's why I would go with MLK with that one, because I don't think MLK is as polarizing a figure. Not at the moment. Not at the moment. I think more and more people have woken up, have awakened over the past couple of years. But I still believe we are somewhat of a ways away. You see that MLK's family is trying to cut the Trump administration off at the pass. They're already putting out excuses. Same thing in which Roland Martin was saying a couple of weeks ago, that he doesn't trust anything that J. Edgar Hoover FBI puts out. King's family, mainly, his daughter, one of his daughters, at least, she's like the main mouthpiece, pretty much saying the exact same thing, telling the public not to trust what the FBI puts out, and they fear that they will smear her father and smear the family and his legacy. And so, right, they're already putting out those excuses before anything has even been released. So dust thou protest too much already. So but that's my answer to that question. I guess I'll get into my thoughts on the montage in more detail as we go on. But
yeah, okay, cool. So what Chad said was, his first comment was, King, there is no ladder without the former. And then he went on to say that the insidiousness of MLK's legacy in quotes, is also what makes him a bigger problem. He is embraced by all spectrums and thus continues to be a Trojan horse. Obama, on the other hand, is restricted by his association with a political party. What this means is that the white support of Black victimology by way of MLK does not exist to the same extent by way of Obama. And I mean, I get that. Like, I agree with that. And I said that in the chat. I will let Mr. Blanche Robinson, speak for himself. Hello, Blanche.
What's going on?
How are you?
Doing all right.
Good. So what are your thoughts? Who is worse?
I think based on what I've learned over the past couple of years, working with you all, I would have to say that MLK is worse. And I think I mentioned this because MLK is an immovable figure in what we see today. And so, like I said, Obama's up for critique. You have some Black folks saying he didn't do anything. Some Black folks say he didn't do enough. Some Black folks say usher in the gay agenda, all of these things. But when it comes to King, he's kind of like Chuck said, he's one of the things that unify what you call the left and the right. And I'd even venture to say that he is a uniparty unifier, meaning that you can look at King and take things and say, you know what, we can build a whole nother party just based on King that we all can get behind. And that's why he's so dangerous. His legacy is really dangerous because to me, it's like a religion. I remember growing up and in my grandparents' house, there was a picture of Jesus, there's a picture of MLK, like it was just like MLK Jesus. And so, you know, we did one episode and I was thinking about how reckless, you know, I think Chad and Chuck were talking about how reckless King was. Like King had just beat a woman up the night before he got assassinated. And I was thinking about how if he, let's say he was communist and everything is true. Everything is true, right? If he's working for communists, they would almost have to get rid of him because he would have eventually tarnished his legacy so much to where he couldn't even be used. So you wouldn't have to get rid of him to where he was a usable figure. So you get rid of him at a time where he's still seen as a quote unquote righteous man. He still has some people following him. He's on all this stuff. But I think if he had to live to be older, he would have been exposed for doing all kind of crazy stuff. So they almost really pretty much had to get rid of him. But the fact that they did get rid of him, I believe, and where he stands today, he is seen as a Messiah. He is the standard. He is what we point to. He is what you would consider like a Mother Teresa. He's considered people that the fact that he, and I'm gonna say this again, the fact that he is a quote unquote martyr makes it even worse because now you can't even really examine him because every comment I read says, this man died for this. This man died for us. So it's almost like whatever he did, it pales in comparison to death. So even though Obama is dangerous and Obama is, you know, a snake, he is all of these things, I think that, like Chuck said, both sides agree on King. That's what makes him so dangerous.
I totally get it. I get that. Maybe I will be persuaded to change my opinion. Let me bring in Jambalaya. Let me check her. Let me mic check. 1 2 1 2. Miss Jambalaya. We
yes,
good?
ma'am. Can you hear me now? Am I
We
good?
can hear you.
Yeah.
I just hear an echo.
Yeah, that's because I had IG running on my phone, and my husband and daughter, which are my technical support, they had to come fix me up. Hey, Blanchard, Chuck, good to
I
see you
still hear
guys.
myself.
You can?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't hear. I could hear it on my end too, but I can't hear it now. I don't know.
It's still a little echo.
Yeah, it's still an echo. I'm gonna.
Oh, is something playing? Is something else playing?
Do you have the show playing, Jambalaya?
No, I have nothing else playing. Nothing. I'm cut off from everything. Only thing I have open is a PowerPoint, and there's no video with that. I can close that, but I don't think that's gonna make.
Do you have headphones or a microphone?
I have a microphone. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why it's echoing.
Because it sounds like the show is coming through. The feedback is coming through the mic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like the mic is picking up.
Yeah.
Feedback.
Yeah.
Push on the shove. Just when you're not talking, I guess you can mute.
Okay.
I don't know. That's my bad. That's my only solution.
Are your speakers on?
Yeah, they are. Because we had the speakers off, so I couldn't even hear you guys talking at first. Yeah, so I don't know. Let me I don't want you guys.
Well, go ahead and just give us your. We'll be quiet, and then you just give us what you think. Then while you work that out.
Okay, my technician is coming to help, so I'll get this out. So I think I agree with you, Quisha. You said that you think that Obama's worse, right? Okay, so I think he's worse too. And my reason for that is I think even though Obama does represent kind of like a messianic figure, like Blanche was saying, I think unlike MLK, Obama doesn't fit, how can I say, he doesn't fit the narrative of MLK because he comes off as like a new and improved, we're going to tie in the old grievances, but then act as if we're kind of over them too. He kind of marries two things, which brings more confusion. So he ties in religion, just like MLK did. He ties in what's the word I want to use? Politics, but via Marxism, but very covertly. And he also ties in race. So on one hand, he says things like, well, black fathers are missing from the home and that's why there are problems. But then on the other hand, he argues that blacks haven't really had it easy. And so all of his policies, if you go look, I looked at the archives on archives.gov, and saw like in the transcripts how almost everything he put forth, he's mentioning African American men, women, boys. Every policy is like catering to that particular group. In fact, he says something like, it's for all Americans, including African Americans. And I'm like, but you're contradicting your statement, because we're all American. So I think he's the worst because he's more covert and insidious, whereas MLK, you just do a little kind of cursory research, you can kind of figure out that he was a black liberation theologist. Whereas Obama looks like he's the man for every man. That's what he kind of ran on.
Yeah, I want to, this is how I see it. And I'm going to say this, and please, like, I'm not trying to be blasphemous or anything like that. But what it reminds me of is like MLK is like the law. And then it's like Obama came, he fulfilled the law. Like you can't, I understand exactly what Blanchard and Chuck are saying. Like, you can't have one without the other. I understand what you're saying about MLK, but I feel like Obama took it to a level as far as like the damage. He took it to a higher level as far as the damage it did to America as a whole. I don't know if that makes sense. But what were you going to say, Chuck?
That was something Blanche had said. It reminded me of the fact that, just about uniting both strains of American politics. Because I hear people say this all the time, that MLK was a Republican. You have some people who consider themselves to be conservative or politically right of center, at least. And whether they be independent, sometimes they may vote for Republican politicians. By saying that MLK was a Republican, they think this is a flex, right? And then you have others and look at the relationship between King and his contingent with the Kennedy administration, and then later on the LBJ administration. And people often say, well, it was King who cemented the black folks in their allegiance to the Democrat Party. I've even seen people say, even under some of Chad, I'll say Chad and I, because I may be in some of these reels, I may repost them to my Instagram page. If it's about King, and I've seen people come into the comment section saying, well, King was a Democrat, so what do you expect, right? And so you got some people claiming he was a Republican, some people claiming he was a Democrat, when it's completely irrelevant whether he was a Republican, whether he was Democrat. Really, it really doesn't matter. That just goes to show you, because I myself, I've seen no evidence, no proof that MLK was ever a Republican. But like I said, it wouldn't matter if he was. So, I just want to bring that out as well. It's just, people can't even figure out, well, what politician or what political party did the MLK belong to, right? They debate and go back and forth as if it really matters, right? So everyone's sort of trying to claim it, so to speak. And to go to what Jambalaya, I always forget. It's been such a long time since I spoke with Jambalaya Talks. I think her real name is Erica, if I'm not mistaken. I apologize if I'm wrong. But something that Erica just said, what'd you say? Ebony. That's it. Ebony. That's right. That's it. Sorry, Ebony. Sorry. Something that she just said about Obama being worse. And mind you, I mean, we're just splitting hairs here, to be honest with you. I think we're being a bit opportunistic, right? Using this opportunity, to just talk about Obama and MLK. yeah, just an opportunity to dig into them furthermore and to go in again, because it really doesn't matter, at least to me. I get it though, and I do understand that the conversation is a worthwhile one. But for anyone who says that Barack Obama is far worse, you won't get any. I'm not going to get up and pound the table and try to shout you down. It is what it is. Right? We can, because the whole point is to really correct the record and get at both of them, right? But the thing about Obama and what Ebony, right, and what Ebony just said about Obama spreading all of this confusion and disinformation is because you have a lot of folks who they will look at Obama and look at MLK, and like Chad just brilliantly put together that montage there, and you can see the similarities in the rhetoric. And the reason why a lot of people excuse MLK is because they have a blatant misconception of the historical record. Even a lot of people who consider themselves to be on the right, and because they consider themselves to be on the right, not only they believe that they have the moral high ground, but they believe that they have the intellectual high ground. And the reality is that a lot of so-called conservatives, a lot of Johnny-come-latelys to the world of politics are just as ignorant as their buddies or their political adversaries on the left. They excuse MLK because, in spite of MLK's flaws, not just in his personal conduct, but in terms of the things that he believed in, a lot of conservatives believe that MLK was simply doing what he had to do because of the times, because they believe in all of the things that, right? And so when Obama comes, 70 years later, and he's still serving up a healthy dose of grievance politics and these kinds of things, people get upset because in their minds, right, the civil rights movement has already solved that issue. So what are you still complaining about, right? They don't see the civil rights movement as an issue. Most Americans, a supermajority of Americans, I would assume, or I would presume, they don't see the civil rights movement as an issue. They see it as necessary. And the fact that Barack Obama is still peddling in this is the issue to them, because in their minds, King is the one who facilitated the change, that necessary change that had to occur. It's just that Obama is passe. He's past his sell-by date, right? He shouldn't be saying those kinds of things now, for crying out loud. He was elected. He's the only a black head of state elected, democratically elected in a white majority country in the history of the sort of legacy of English common law. He's the only one. And so people say that, that's why they're upset with Obama. It's like, dude, why are you still doing this, right? King solved this, right? And so I think that's a huge part of it as well, because people actually believe that King was necessary when he wasn't.
And another reason, I would say because he was president. I mean, that's a lot of power that Martin Luther King did not have, to put things in place that we're clawing our way out of now. Like this DEI. Barack Obama is largely responsible for the restorative justice, the DEI, all of these social, they didn't become law, but they wrote on the backs of the Civil Rights Act, but they became these programs and these this sort of like renewed way of thinking, this indoctrination of like all the DEI and the trans and all of that stuff. He was able to embed these in society to me to another level that Martin Luther King did, but I don't know. I don't feel like it was as deeply woven. It wasn't as like brain, as deeply woven, I guess, into the culture of American society.
It began back then. You can look at King as a symbol, but from a political standpoint, JFK got the ball rolling on a lot of this stuff before he was assassinated. And when LBJ took the reins, he was able to jam a lot of this stuff through politically. because he exploited the shock and the grievance of the nation after witnessing a president get his head blown off in Daley Plaza in Dallas in 1963. And the whole selling point, the pitch was LBJ gave to the public, to the American people, was that, well, JFK sacrificed his life for this. This was JFK doing. This is what JFK would have wanted. JFK once famously said that he's the one who popularized this idea of what he coined, or what he said was, quote, investing in our poor, because there was pushback to JFK because people were asking, what was this going to cost the nation? Not just what this was going, not only were they asking what was this going to cost the nation in terms of the Bill of Rights, or what was this going to cost the nation, of course, financially. And JFK's whole idea was, if we use the federal purse to invest in our misfortunate, then we won't have to deal with the consequences of all sorts of societal breakdowns later on down the line. So we pay now so that we can save later. And that was JFK's whole premise. And then LBJ came about, afterwards. And he's the one who institutionalized a lot of these things, a lot of these federal agencies, to combat poverty and to do all these sorts of things. And we also saw concurrently running alongside that were a lot of these neo-Marxist cultural ideas that began to infest, particularly in terms of education, with a lot of these sexual sex education and these various things. I mean, all the stuff that LBJ did, I mean, it wasn't just the 1964 Civil Rights Act. There were a ton of bills that LBJ signed into law that really, I mean, it's called the Great Society Program for a reason. I mean, and a lot of this stuff really helped to cement politically a lot of the 60s era progressivism. It really made it a institutional staple in American life. So it was around back then, Quisha. Like you said, it just further metastasized as the decades went on. I mean, one of the most dangerous, I think, things that happened under LBJ was the establishment of the EEOC. That's just one thing I can think of off the top of my head, but there are a lot of things that LBJ did, that really solidified the slow downfall of the United States, the slow motion collapse.
Oops, sorry. I want to hear from Jambalaya. Let's see if we got. Do you want me to call you Ebony or Jambalaya?
Yeah, y'all family. Y'all can call me Ebby.
Okay.
Don't call her Erica.
No, please. No. Especially
I'm sorry.
Erica,
I talked to you for so long, I couldn't remember. My bad.
when you say Erica,
I knew it started with an E.
You made me think of that Kev on Stage joke when he talks about black names, and he said Erica was spelled AIRWRECKA. Here comes
That's
the
Erica.
Yeah.
Listen, I cannot talk about the way nobody's name is spelled at all. Never.
I know. All right, I know. Ain't that right, Quisha?
I think my mom was trying to pay her duty to society since I was born in the 70s. And since she had a light-skinned man, she had to give me a black name to try to like give it back to society. I don't know why she named me that. Anyway, I digress. Can you guys hear me better now? We tried to do some more work on the mic.
Yeah,
no, you all good.
You good now.
You all good.
All right, so I want to share something. So this is by G. Michael Hope. I'm sure you guys have heard of it. It's that quote about weak men, strong men, those out of those who remain. And it says, when people experience prolonged periods of ease and comfort, they may not develop the same level of resilience, resourcefulness, and mental fortitude as those who face challenges, potentially leading to a perception of weakness. When confronted with difficult situations, essentially without obstacles to overcome, individuals can become complacent and less prepared to handle hardship. And I think if you see what happened under MLK, there was actual hardship comparatively to Obama. But what Obama did, which was brilliant in its wickedness, was he created and fabricated the old feelings, stoked the old fires of a day way back when that presently those people had never experienced, but had some type of relation to whether it was history in school or family stories or, relative experiences they could try to tie to those things, though they were not relative. And then he picked that wound and then poured salt in it. And so while everything is great and gravy compared to that time, if you create an idea that it's not great, it's never been great, and it could be greater, people live off of copium and hopism, and they fed right into it. The other thing that I thought was interesting is on gotquestions.org, which I pray nobody actually looks for Christian answers on their website. Please don't do any biblical research.
Questions.org.
Please. You got questions, don't go to them. But they said the goal of the civil rights movement was good and biblical. Ensured fair rights.
Oh, yeah, they do have on the social stuff. Yeah, they're not good.
Yeah, and equal treatment for all. Any action that worked against this goal, therefore, must be considered unbiblical. So, y'all, we unbiblical. I just want y'all to know. The Bible not only forbids favor for specific people groups, but it forbids unfair treatment of anyone. And they have the audacity to quote James 2:1-7, which is completely out of context, about treating someone with money that comes into the congregation better than someone that has nothing. Last thing, Glenda E. Gilmore's book called Defying Dixie, The Radical Roots of Civil Rights, 1919 through 1950, she says, the existing historical literature named the period from roughly 1954 to 1966 the civil rights movement. Yet it was clear that African Americans had fought for rights since the Civil War. To discount those longer struggles casts the fight as arising spontaneously and limits its scope. And I would argue to pretend like it came spontaneously is to try to maybe play off of the egregious things that were happening and then marrying them with things that weren't, right? And then she said, the century-long civil rights movement was always about more than eliminating segregation and getting voting rights. The two major accomplishments of the 1950s and 1960s is what they said that was about. But looking at the civil rights movement as short, successful, and led by male clerics actually persuaded Americans that the nation's racial problems were shallow and pious, and these men could easily settle them. So the term radical roots of civil rights refers to the idea that the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s was built upon a foundation of earlier, more radical activism during the 1920s and 40s, where a diverse group of Black activists, including labor organizers, intellectuals, and newspaper editors, employed a wide range of strategies to challenge segregation and racial injustice in the South, often facing significant violence and resistance, laying the groundwork for the later legal battles for desegregation and voting rights. So while MLK may have been the roots of the tree, I would say that Obama was not only the leaves and the stalk, he was the rotten fruit.
When the Blanche, we was about to say something, Blanche, you ain't spoken in a while, because I had something to say to that.
Oh, wait, can I just really quick, just to play devil's advocate, I would say if it's to Blanche's point, I think Blanche said, wouldn't, because if we would define it as MLK as the root, if that they're saying like that root continues to get water no matter what, and so the tree stays alive. Like if the root died, it would, if the root wasn't getting fed,
right,
then but I guess you're saying like, Obama kind of feeds the root.
Well, what I'm saying is people thought that the tree was cut down, and Obama popping up shows, to y'all point, that it's been getting a blood life source the entire time. So I guess kind of to Chuck's point, it's kind of a moot point to say that Obama is worse. He's a continuation of what was bad already, so it doesn't even really matter, to be honest.
And that's why I say it's like the law and the fulfilling of the law. It's like maybe bad or worse is the wrong type of, like, who was worse is the wrong type of comparison, but I don't know. Oh, sorry. Okay, Blanche, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, so back to when I said about King. So even right now, right, the things that Obama did are being fought against. We're fighting against things like DEI. We're fighting against this LGBTQ agenda. Like, we're fighting, these things are being fought against currently. What's not getting fought against is King's legacy. That's still set in stone. So even if what Obama's done is defeated, those roots will still spring up another source. Like, so it's almost like you can always go back to King's legacy and continue this thing over and over and over again because the roots aren't dug up. And so we're not challenging King's legacy. We're challenging current things that stem from King's legacy. But the problem is we have to go to the root to get rid of the problem. And nobody would dare touch the root because both sides agree that the root is good. So when we talk about the civil rights movement, nobody's going to think it's bad. 99% of people think that, like somebody said earlier, that it was, I think Chuck said it was necessary for the civil rights movement. The problem is that it wasn't necessary. So now we have to go back through history and find out what really took place. And that involves more than just fighting the symptoms of this, what we call disease. Fighting against this stuff now is treating the symptoms. The actual source is for us to go back and examine who King was, because examining who King was opens up the rabbit hole for a whole lot of things that people are uncomfortable with. And then you really, to me, attacking that really gets a divide on who's on the right and who's on the left. Right now, it's kind of ambiguous a little bit because we're arguing over Obama and this, that, but King, we're not arguing over him. And he actually was, think about what he was. He had on his right hand, he had a gay man, black man. On the other hand, he had a liberal Jewish man. And on top of that, behind that, you have the media, you have the institutions, you have you even have the president. So when we talk about influence, even though Obama was the president, we got to look at American culture itself is influenced by King, the entire culture. So how we even view America through these lenses that we have are viewed through the eyes of the civil rights movement. That is always what they turn back to: water hoses, dogs biting people, bricks, integrating schools. That is woven into the fabric of America. And how do you get rid of that? How do you tell the world that what you're seeing right now with your own eyes was wrong? How do you tell somebody that these folks you see outside getting hit with water hoses, they're actually in the wrong? So to me, that's a lot more dangerous than DEI, because people are arguing against DEI. People are arguing against this stuff that Obama did. They're not arguing with King's legacy. And like I said before, it makes sense to why he was assassinated, because now you have this immortal figure that we can't get out the way, even to the point where, like Chuck said, they're going to preface you and say, no man is perfect. No man is without fault. We've all have sinned. So whatever you found about King, either Hoover was a racist and a liar, or King was still a man and deserves grace. So either, like, again, he's an immortal figure.
No, yeah. Great points. Great points. Oh, did you have something, Chuck?
Yeah, just real quick on what Ebony said, listening to her, and I just smirked when she read the one part of the passage talking about the civil rights movement and how it took learned a lot from the activists of the 20s, 30s, 40s, and I forgot the book and the author she was citing from there, but the 20s and 40s and how that author described them, right? As, labor activists and, these types of individuals. And so if you know the lingo, you know the talk, right? You know what she's describing, right? She's talking about Marx. She's talking about communists. That's what she's talking about, especially, someone like A. Philip Randolph, who was such a towering figure in America for a time. So especially, once someone in Marcus Garvey was deported for, mail fraud and these other things involved with his Black Star Line, A. Philip Randolph was probably the most powerful and most famous Black activist in the country. You had him, you had other folks like Cyril Briggs. He was the founder of an organization called the African Blood Brotherhood. They were a group of, this was back in the 1920s, they were a group of Black communists. It was like the pipeline for the Communist Party into the Blacks in the West Indies and in the Americas. Many of those who became members of the African Blood Brotherhood like Lovett Ford Whiteman and many others, actually went to the Soviet Union for a time, along with other Harlem Renaissance luminaries like Langston Hughes, and you had other famous Black communists. One in James W. Ford, who ran for vice president on the Communist Party ticket twice in the 1930s. I mentioned all of these men. Frank Marshall Davis, the novelist Richard Wright, and A. Philip Randolph. All of these men were involved in the creation of what was called the National Negro Congress back in the 1930s. And they had their first inaugural gathering in Chicago. I think the year was 1936 or 1938. And at the time, the National Negro Congress was deemed the largest civil rights coalition in the country. Right? It boasted millions of members, millions of followers. Again, and, A. Philip Randolph, they say, eventually had to distance himself from the National Negro Congress once it was made clear to him, and he couldn't deny the fact that the National Negro Congress was, in fact, a front for Soviet communists. It was actually being controlled from Moscow. Right, and they were being given their marching orders directly from Joseph Stalin. So A. Philip Randolph chose to separate himself from that organization, but he was still a socialist nonetheless. He just didn't want to take his marching orders from Moscow. And so I just want to point that out, because the civil rights movement, like the earlier civil rights movement in the 1920s and 30s, was a communist movement, as was the movement to integrate newly freed Blacks into the mainstream of society after the Civil War, which is partly the reason why, for those of you who saw a portion of the documentary that Chad O. Jackson's working on, I featured in it. This is why we took time to talk about the era of the civil rights movement, because by the mid 1800s is when a lot of these radical ideas, after the publication, not even after the publication of the Communist Manifesto in 1948, you had socialist societies and socialist clubs in the United States as early as 1939. In New York, you had something called the Fourierist Society that was founded by a leftist by the name of Albert Brisbane. Albert Brisbane was an American who started a socialist political club in New York, because he was heavily influenced by a lot of French communists like Henri Saint-Simon and Charles Fourier. And so you had a lot of these communist ideas were festering in America's in America's northern states leading up to the Civil War. And you had a lot of these radical Marxian ideas was fueling this era of the 1860s. Even then, we saw these laws and these sorts of things. We saw this back in the 1860s, and then 100 years later, it would come full circle by the 1960s, because we saw the first attempts at instituting a lot of these kind of broad, not very, the language and the laws were not very specific, right, as far as what to do and how to deal with Blacks who were now free. And so we saw the attempted, it did eventually pass, but I believe that the Federal Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, overturned the 1866 Civil Rights Act, which eventually led to the amending of the Constitution to create the 14th Amendment to essentially, right, enshrine the 1866 Civil Rights Act once it was deemed unconstitutional. And it had been vetoed by President Andrew Johnson. His veto was overridden, and then the Supreme Court had to step in. And so the Republicans at the time said that we're going to push this through, we're going to have to amend the Constitution. And if you actually look at the history of how the 14th Amendment was passed, it wasn't passed legally and constitutionally. It was a lot of nefarious maneuvering on behalf of the Republican-dominated Congress at the time. And so, to Ebony's point, this was a 100-year march, so to speak, through through the institutions, beginning in the 1830s.
Yeah, no, I'm. It's for sure. It's not it's not all going to Barack Obama or, MLK. These things, and that was something that I had to learn how far back in America these things were, and how they just kept growing and growing and growing. This is a clip that was interesting to me. Let's take a look.
We need not despair. Well, we need not despair because we are on the side of right. And if you are right, God will fight your battle. This is our faith, and this is what we live by.
So that clip plus, if I can find it, it was the clip about him saying.
I didn't hear it all, Keisha. I only heard like the end of it, Keisha. Did y'all hear it? I heard like the last couple words.
I heard
it was a short clip, but I'll replay it.
Okay.
Let's see, where is it?
And we need not despair. Well, we need not despair because we are on the side of right. And if you are right, God will fight your battle. This is our faith, and this is what we live by.
Yeah, just that about God will fight your battles and all that. And I wanted to play the one where he was talking about how pull yourself up by your bootstraps is what everybody else tells you, but doesn't he know that we don't have any boots, or we have holes in our boots or something like that, he said. And I'm just like, well, wait a minute now. How you got all these holy boots and you don't have no boat, to pull yourself up or to row through the tide, or you have nothing, but you say you have God. Like, help me understand like how that works. That is what, like, all of these speeches, and how do people, myself included, how do you miss things like that where he's talking about, oh, we can't do nothing, we ain't got nothing, we ain't never gonna do. We Christians, and we're supposedly connected to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the God who owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, and who spoke a word and created the entire universe. Right. But we don't have no boots.
But doesn't that kind of go along what we've been saying as far as like when you marry, kings, and again, King wasn't the first. I have a book called Been in the Storm So Long, The Aftermath of Slavery. And they kind of like, on one hand, they talk about how Blacks like suffered through bondage, but they still like really fought to keep their families together. We know Chad and you guys have kind of touched on that a lot. But on the other hand, they were like lamenting, how every time they would try to make a few steps forward after slavery, somebody was always coming, and trying to hold them down. Now, I don't deny, Jim Crow, Reconstruction, all of that. But what they don't acknowledge is like what happened to the family was something that they continued to obliterate themselves by their wrong choices, which means that you're either looking to the government to fix you and save you, or which a lot of the slaves did not, or you believe that you can't do it yourself, because you can't look for the hero in the perpetrator. And that's the thing that's confusing. It's like they have to, like you say, with the bootstraps and stuff, and then they mention God. I think that's because the God that they're talking about is the God that is more like he's more like a Caesar. It's a government God. It's his daddy. Yeah, and I just wanted to share this real quick because it's actually a passage from that book, and it says, whatever the mixed emotions with which freedmen view their former owners after emancipation, nothing could obliterate the slave experience from their minds, and it would continue to shape the attitudes and behavior of many of them long after their old masters and mistresses had passed from the scene. Some preferred to put the past behind them, if only to contain their emotions and memories. Nearly a decade after the war, an older student at Hampton Institute, now pay attention to that because he's at a Black college, He told the teacher that he preferred not to talk about slavery times. He says, if I think too much about them myself, I cannot keep feeling right as I want to toward my old masters. I do anything for them I could, and I want to forget what they've done to me. Forgiveness, like compassion, could be extended only so far. For many former slaves, the teachings of Christianity and their recollections of slavery would never be easily reconciled. Although some slave families were disrupted by irreparable psychological damage, if not by sale, what seems so remarkable is that most of them endured the experience of slavery. On most plantations and farms, the lives of the slaves, field hands, house servants, and artisans alike revolved around family units. The two-parent household predominated, and the Black husband and father exerted in his own way the dominant influence in that household. If he could not always provide for his family as he wished, he tried to supplement their diets with hunting, fishing, and yes, sometimes even theft. If he could not always protect his family as he wished, he often managed to lay down a line of tolerated behavior beyond which masters and overseers proceeded at their own risk. Few wives expected their husbands to sacrifice their lives in this way. Fully aware of the master's power, most couples made the necessary accommodations that reflected not indifference to family ties, but the simple resolve to keep the family together and alive. The same consideration would impede escape until the proximity of the Union Army enabled entire families to leave the plantations. So my argument just from that piece is, if you've got people working within the machinations of the system, they're not free, they don't have as much freedom, even with access to each other, they actually still laid down whatever laws or rules they can because they had something called integrity and values. And a government system cannot give you integrity or values. They cannot give you a belief system. You have one or you don't. And they either know how to play on those vulnerabilities and manipulate you, right? Or you can say, okay, this is what the government does, but I still stand by how I live. And I'm not like, I don't want reparations. I don't care if they do try to give it to me because I don't need them. Or I'm not going to take it just because they're offering it and I don't have an argument. So with MLK and Obama, to me, they're two heads of the same coin, but one head has bigger horns. That's all.
That's a good way to say it. That's really good, though. Oh, go ahead.
No, and like Ebony was saying, I mean, yeah, families were intact, far more than they will go on to be by the 1960s, 1970s. The counterculture came in like a bat out of hell. But I just wanted to as well add just to augment that because a lot of people have this image in their mind of in the South, particularly with families being torn apart and husbands and wives being separated, children. That wasn't the case. As a matter of fact, it was very common even for a slave master to, I mean, it wasn't this steady dose of just abuse and mistreatment. Oftentimes, slaves had a choice. They got to decide where they lived and who they in fact were sold to. Sometimes if a slave didn't want to go, they wouldn't leave. Sometimes the slave master would consult them.
Wait a minute. Sometimes like they were offered freedom and they didn't want to leave.
No. When I say
to another plantation.
They didn't. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They were offered to be sold to another owner. If they liked their owner, they got along with their owner. They wanted to stay with them. They didn't want to be sold, and they didn't want to, have their family separated. That's the point I was. That's the point I was making.
That's actually in scripture too, Chuck. By the way.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and so I just wanted to point that out. And too, even I think when you mentioned that, Quisha, I think there were some examples, even with some famous slave owners. I think even in the case of George Washington, I think there were examples of his slaves or others offering to buy George Washington's slaves, and they refused to. They didn't want to be sold, so they weren't sold. And then, of course, as you read over George Washington's will, he said that upon the death of his wife, in his last will and testament, he wanted his slaves to be freed upon the death of his wife. Well, George Washington's wife she did end up freeing their slaves before she passed away, and so she violated his last wish by freeing them sooner than he wanted them to be free. But it reminds me, listening to Ebony speak when she just read that. I want to read something too, if I may. All right, this is from a interview given by J.H. Jackson to the Chicago Tribune in 1973, and he's talking about his experience growing up in the Delta down in Mississippi. All right, in the 1920s, 1910s, 1920s. He says, "I saw the lynching parties of white folks looking for Negro victims. Our father taught us not to be bitter children yet. We were." So his father taught him not to be bitter, but they were still bitter. He says, "We worked with our hands in the cotton fields. When the white landowner would ride through, we children would stop working. We wouldn't hit a lick. We would stop. We stopped out of resentment for his presence." I'm the white man. "I had to gradually outgrow that. When I went to college, I saw many fine, upstanding Negro teachers, stately people who were not bitter. I found many white fellows failing in college, and I began to feel sympathy for some of them. I found they were not the superior creatures they told us they were." You see, Barack Obama, listening to him, and he's a stone cold liar when he says what he says about his mother, or at least he contradicts himself, because in his own memoir, The Audacity of Hope, he, in so many words, described his mother as an atheist. As a matter of fact, he says in The Audacity of Hope that Christianity was never a huge part of his mother's whole thing when he was growing up, because he said in his own words that his mother's experiences with Christians were oftentimes negative. She took, and he didn't describe it this way, but he took the whole Marxist line, right? That is the opiate of the masses and the sign of the oppressed, because, of course, the ruling class, the property owning class, it lulls the oppressed, it lulls the proletarian to sleep by convincing them that their reward is coming in the hereafter. And that's how they're able to exploit you they're able to subdue your revolutionary fervor by convincing you that you'll be rewarded in the afterlife, right? It's sort of like what Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam, these are the kinds of things that they would peddle back in the day, right? And so he lies. And all of a sudden, his mom was a Christian, whatever. And when he was running for president, he would switch it all up, because, of course, the public began to question whether or not he was actually Muslim, right? Because, that's what I wanted to mention too as well. To go back to his mom, she believed the same thing, that pretty much that religion was simply used by ignorant people as an excuse to explain away things that they couldn't understand. So in other words, according to Barack Obama's own words in his memoir, that religion was simply something that ignorant, stupid people believed in. And this is what his mom imparted into him. Fast forward to 2007, he's running for office. He's being interviewed. I forgot the reporter's name. I think it may have been ABC or something like that. But he's confronted about whether or not he's Muslim. And he says, "No, I've always been Christian." He said, "My mom was Christian when she met my father being from Kenya." He says, "But my father was not a practicing Muslim." Well, of course, his father would be a practicing Muslim, because his father was an atheist, just like his mother, because his father, too, was a communist. And I'm not talking about Frank Marshall Davis. I'm talking about Barack Obama Sr. was, too, a Marxist, heavily influenced by the Kenyan Marxists that took over that country by the name of Jomo Kenyatta. And so Barack Obama lies. But to go back to that mentor, and it's piggybacking off of something Ebony said, and it's piggybacking off what Joseph H. Jackson said. He's talking about resentment and what resentment does to the soul. And when Barack Obama is saying what he's saying about living in a pluralistic society, we have Hindus, we have Muslims, we have this, we have that. got to understand that this whole idea of separation of church and state, separation of church and state between the federal government, the state, so on and so forth. That's because the secular law adapts, but the religious law endures. It is the Judeo-Christian ethic that laid the groundwork for the very existence of the secular law in the first place, because you have to have certain preconditions in place, because the people themselves have to be religious along Christian lines in order for this idea of classical liberalism that came out of the Enlightenment to even work in the first place. You can't have such a thing, for example, if you kowtow, and I'm just going to come out and say it, if you kowtow, for example, to Islam, because what makes the United States work is the Christian creed, of course, of repentance and forgiveness. Because when you repent, you sacrifice your pride. When you forgive, you cultivate this culture of sacrifice, which makes the people governable. It gives way to the very idea of the consent of the governed, right? Public spirit. You can't have that without Christianity. So this whole idea, respectful law, the public spirit, and a culture of confession. These are all Christian precepts. It wouldn't work any other way. And so that's why, you have to have that hegemonic, that hedge of a kind of a Judeo-Christian culture that can even facilitate the kind of pluralism that Barack Obama is talking about in the first place. He knows that multiculturalism is a disaster. He knows multiculturalism destroys. He knows multiculturalism is going to open your society up to conquer by foreign ideas. He knows this. And so that really ticked me off and upset me, right? You have to repent, sacrifice your pride. You have to repent to sacrifice your resentment, and that's how we come up with a culture of accountable government. Can't work any other way.
Oh yeah, you don't have just go ahead, just start talking.
Yeah, if Chuck or Blanche bring up the word of God, it stokes my fire. So I got to like ride on that. So I want to quote Spurgeon. He said, "The height of crime is reached when rulers use the forms of justice as mask for injustice and give legal sanction to mischief. They legalize robbery and violence and then plead that it is the law of the land. And so indeed it may be, but it is wickedness for all that. They gather together against the life of the righteous." And then scripture, 1 John 3:13 says, "Do not marvel, my brethren, if the world hates you." Spurgeon continues, "And everything that is evil, they are in unity." So Obama and Martin would definitely fit that. "The devil, his angels, and his children all join and draw together when they have for their object the destruction of the works of the Lord." So in conjunction with what Chuck said, I'll take it even a step further. And I know that this might be controversial, but I think you guys will get it. I think one of the things that's probably unfortunate when it comes to like exposing any type of wickedness is you have to be careful how you qualify what holiness is or what goodness is. And what I mean by that is, yes, the country is founded on, Judeo-Christian ethics. But here's the problem. Even now in our present day nomenclature, Christianity is not the Christianity of its origins. Right. So while I agree with you, I'll just take it a step further. I think instead of qualifying that righteous things are Christian, I think it's better to say righteous things are biblical, because the scriptures don't change. Christianity may evolve and devolve 1,000 times over. And then when we say Christian, it's like saying gay 20 years ago, which meant happy. We know we can't walk around saying I feel gay today, right? So since the Bible never has to be updated, but Christianity does, when we're talking about righteous things, we have to qualify it through the scriptures. And I'm gonna share another thing that kind of ties into what Chuck said from that same book. So it's another quote. Now, this is a man by the name of Henry McNeil Turner. This is in Augusta, Georgia, and it's called Becoming a People. This was written January 4th, 1866. He said, "We want," and Chuck, I really want to know what you think about this, and you too, Blanche. I want to know what you hear when you hear this. "We want representative men without regard to color." Okay, that's how it starts. But then he says, if they carry the brand of Negro oppression. That sounds contradicted to me, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. It says we need power and intellectual equality with the whites. Now, remember, this is in the 1800s. It does not matter whether he be a pretty or ugly Negro, a black Negro, I don't even know what that means, or a mulatto. Whether he were a slave or a free Negro. The question is he a Negro at all? This can be like Joy Reid on MSNBC saying this.
Yeah,
we want
yeah.
power. We want power. It only comes through, here goes the Marxist language, organization, and organization comes through unity. Our efforts must be one and inseparable, blended, tied, and bound together. There's your Tower of Babel. Quoting again. Now, here's the contradiction, and I think this is where we would be in agreement because it shows you the varying thoughts at the time. Like Chuck said, there wasn't like a monolithic way of thinking back then. With negotiations for new contracts coming in the wake of the first elections, employers like William Gamble of Henry County, Alabama, simply inserted a new clause which forbade the laborers to, quote, attend elections or political meetings, end quote, without his consent. The beatings meted out to Black voters, the assassination of Black leaders, the intimidation of Black candidates, and the breaking up of meetings were suggestive of some of the techniques of terrorism that would be embellished in the next few years to expedite the political emasculation of the freedmen. Despite the threats and economic coercion, Blacks voted in overwhelming numbers in their first exercise of political power. On the eve of the election, laborers from the surrounding countryside began to pour into the towns, filling up the streets and attending last-minute rallies, marching in torchlight parades, partaking in the traditional election eve festivities they had once watched from a distance. The next morning, lines formed outside the polling places as freedmen waited anxiously for the moment when they would cast their first vote, with rumors circulating that Blacks expected to return from the polls with a mule and a deed to a 40-acre lot. A reporter in one town thought to ask a freedman waiting to vote whether he shared that expectation for the land and the mule. No, sir, he replied scornfully. I expect to get nothing but what I worked hard for, and when I'm sick, I'll get docked. Seldom did the freedmen standing in line speak to each other, a reporter noted, apparently deeming silence more appropriate to the sacred importance of the occasion. Noticing one of his laborers in line, an employer in Montgomery, Alabama, just discharged him on the spot. The freedman simply smiled, looked down, said nothing, and voted. So again, if we're going to go back to MLK and Obama, you know what I find interesting about Obama, and I read this historical, note, is that I always say, my husband and I always say, Blacks are too emotional. Right? Everything they do is emoting. And they don't even know what they're angry for. So if you keep people, and Marx knew this too, because that's why it was talked about. Like I have quotes from him when he says we have to unify, it's the proletariat against the bourgeoisie, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, if you don't define terms, you start thinking that those terms ensconce everything that capture your emotions, right? So the bourgeoisie is who? Well, in Marx's time, it's anybody who is considered a capitalist or born into money, right? And all the have-nots, even if they're the working class, they didn't think all of them to complain until this guy shows up and says, look, see? And you can go back to the Tsar of Russia and the same thing, right? When they start raising up a rebel group because he made some dumb choices about war, people were starving. But the belief is, when you look back, that we're supposed to think all those people in that time thought exactly the same, they felt exactly the same, and they had the same experiences. Well, let's look at today. Do we all think the same as quote unquote Black people? Blanche, I know you're not Black, but I'm just saying.
This for today's conversation.
Do we all think alike? Do we all have the same experiences? I'm from California and I moved to the South. Black people from the South think completely different to how I was raised. And that's just state difference, right? So when I moved here, I was told, you're going to do good, girl, because you're a red bone. And I was like, what the hell is a red bone? Black. It was like backward thinking. So, yeah, I just want to share that. Thank you.
No, that's really good. And these types of tactics of, agitating the margins. You want to find people who, my husband and I were just talking about this today, finding these people on the outskirts of some of where there could be a problem with a group that is not a part of the majority. That's like the playbook. You go, you find them, you organize around a problem, and you agitate the problem, and you try to get others to join in. And unfortunately, the way the human beings are set up, one of our flaws in the on this side of heaven, at least, is that we're drawn to groups. We're drawn to groups, whether they be good or bad, and we stop. The point of the emotional rhetoric, the unity. Oh, don't you see that is wrong? How are you gonna let somebody do you like that? If I was you, I would. All of these things. The things that get is to cut off. I forget what they call it. There's a technical term, but to get you to cut off your reasoning, to get you to stop with your reasoning and just rely on your emotions. Like, that is a common communist tactic that, especially the leaders, they use very well, like the orators like Barack Obama, Martin Luther King, even though he didn't write his own speeches, the speech writers knew if he said certain words, it's going to do something to you psychologically that makes you disregard critical thinking. It is evilly brilliant, unfortunately.
I think the sad thing is that if we look at voting patterns and we look at cultural acceptance, Black people are a monolith. We can say we are different, but if you talk to the average Black person and put a 10 questionnaire out of what do you believe, how do you feel about King, how do you feel about civil rights, how do you feel about I guarantee most Black folks would answer the same way. When I talk to Black people, this is the problem. Black entertainment it's never been entertainment. It's been programming and propaganda. So Black people don't really, it's almost, you have to be deprogrammed to even, come to this side of knowing what reality even is. And so, even though Evie came and they were like, you're a red bone, you're gonna make it. But the mindset about what's going on in America is still it's still the same. Like, is America racist? Yes. Are you oppressed? Yes. So like all of these things, Black folks think as a group, and like Evie mentioned, it's because it's all emotionally driven. Mm-hmm. So if it's emotionally driven, it doesn't give way for critical thought. Like you said, Quisha, there is no critical thought if I'm emotionally charged. So even when we go to church, it's a pastor. I said today, a pastor could literally do a whole sermon today, leave his Bible closed, and talk about Trump and Elon Musk and Doge and have the whole place rocking. He ain't got to open up the Bible one time and have the church rocking, talking about Trump and all. So again, Quisha, and I mentioned Pavlov's dog. When you say racism, oppression, it's like ringing that bell and Black folks salivating.
Yeah.
When you mention we got to come together, we got to unite. I'm like, if y'all ain't united after 400, y'all say 500 years, it ain't gonna happen.
Bring up to 5 now.
Evie, you asked what me and Chuck thought about when a guy says if he can take on the Negro oppression. Yeah, that sounds like a great value mindset. That's the cheap way of existing if you want to take on the Negro's oppression. The problem is that Black folks are in a conundrum because on one hand, Black people are synonymous with the church, the Bible, God's word, that God, like all of that, Black folks are synonymous with that. On the other hand, they're synonymous with oppression, liberation theology, Marxism. So it's like two huge movements that Black folks kind of exist between both of them. On one hand, they want to be a Christian. On one hand, they want to be a communist. Well, on one hand, we want to go by God's word, walk by faith. On the other hand, we need Joe Biden to hold our hands. So it's like Black folks exist in this tug of war between these two ideologies, and it literally just gives way for confusion. when we get to white people, there are conservative whites, there are liberal whites, there are radical whites, there are like white people aren't a monolith. Bless you. White people fight all the time about what they believe in when it comes to America. Black people, not so much. Black people fight against us. They ain't fighting against each other. Like, we're the odd people out. And if you ever wanted a great example, I think Chuck played a video, not Chuck, but Chad, where it's Candace Owens and T.I. If you ever want to see anybody coming into the room with just a counter thought, just a thought that maybe America wasn't those bad, the whole room was like, get her out of here.
Stoner.
It was like, grab her wig. Oh my, she don't have one. You get her anyway.
I was on Twitter. I was on X, and I invited Chad because they actually had right around Martin Luther King's birthday, like 5 people. So that should tell you all you need to know. Talking about, holding on to MLK's legacy, and we got to make sure people stop disrespecting them. And within like 15 minutes, I told Chad, I said, yeah, I got to bounce. He was like, yeah, I can't do it no more. It was so painful to listen.
Wow. I want to
go ahead.
Just respond to what Abby said, and I would agree. So from now on, yeah, I think I'm going to make that change whenever I revisit that point, like she mentioned, because Christianity, right? You talk about culture. I remember you got Richard Dawkins running around calling himself a cultural Christian. Still claiming to be an atheist, right?
Yeah, we
because
go.
we talk about because case in point is why we're talking about this, right? Because Christianity, or saying I'm a Christian, it doesn't offer you the truth necessarily, but it does offer you a sense of community, right? But that doesn't say anything about, I guess, where you are in terms of your understanding of the true nature of Christ. And so, do you have sound doctrine? Goes back to, remember what I said, Quisha, and I read to you an excerpt from Whitaker Chambers' congressional testimony when he was asked by Robert Stripling why he believes that many elite, very successful people in America, why do they fall for the Communist Party? Why do they join the party? And Whitaker said that they have a very natural concern, almost a quote Christian concern for underprivileged people. He said a lot more, but that was one part of his response. He said they have almost like a Christian concern for underprivileged people. And so I think, so Abby is right when she says that, Christianity can change, but the doctrine, Bible, talk about Bible, that doesn't change. So, that is a good idea to substitute Christian for biblical values, biblical principles. And, what does the Bible say? Because, I watched Blanchard live today and had me in stitches with this fool, Jamal Bryant. It's a shame. He is, he's going to provide us with plenty of laughs over the next however long.
Y'all don't want to protest against Target? That's a no?
No, I'm good with that. He talking about sell your shares. I'm like, bro, you don't even know how much the shares were worth when I bought in. What if I'm giving up my wealth? You got to sacrifice though, right? But he
need to sacrifice and take care of them doggone kids he got about them other women. But I digress.
Somebody, he better not sell not now share because believe me, the child support is watching. He ain't gonna sell nothing.
Right.
We have an update from Chad. Chad says, listening from afar, y'all are having a great discussion. Thank you, Chad. We appreciate the compliment.
Somebody said that religion makes the oppressors feel good and excuse for their past misdemeanors.
Religion makes the oppressors feel good.
Yeah, that's pretty much it's the opiate, it's the opiate of the masses. You might as well just went ahead and quoted Marx. I don't know why you said the same way he said it. Right, just say it the exact same way he said it.
Oh boy, we're gonna move right. Blanche, would you read the super chat?
Oh yeah.
Because we are poor people, the underprivileged, we don't sin, right? We do nothing wrong, right? I've never done anything to any. Yeah.
highest automatically.
I was just thanking God today about how I'm so glad I'm so perfect and great and not like other
right.
people. Like that guy in the
I don't
Bible.
need, right. I don't need God, right? I don't need, yeah, okay.
I'm oppressed. I'm righteous.
That's right. I'm oppressed, so I'm righteous.
02122. Sorry I'm late. My main phone died, so I'm tuning in on my Obama phone that I got on MLK Day in 2010. Anyway, what y'all talking about? Thank you, 0212. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jesus loves you. God bless the chat. Quisha, Chuck, Blanche, and Talks, Jambalaya. Thank you. Diane, MLK weaponized and spread social gospel throughout America. I can see that MLK was worse. Thank you, Diane, for the super sticker. Sub-Zero, yo. Thank you, Sub-Zero. Martin Towns, thank you for the super sticker. Jerome B, happy Sunday. Thank you for the super sticker. And DT, thank you for the super sticker. Thank you so much, y'all.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, let's get another clip in here.
We have utterly pushed aside the old stymied adult Negro leadership in the South, and we have organized ourselves into student groups, into student protest, nonviolent protest groups.
Many of the students work with Dr. Martin Luther King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Years ago, people would say, well, the NAACP is the worst organization in America. It's subversive. Then when the sit-downs came, they said to us, well, no, you shouldn't sit in. We ought to do it the way the sane and stable NAACP does it. Now, this year we're hearing that, well, the Freedom Ride is not the way to do it. You ought to do it the way you did the sit-ins. And I predict that in the next several months, when another area is attacked, they'll say, well, you should have done that like you did the Freedom Rides. And so the defenses just move back one line each time.
Were you guys able to hear that?
Yeah, we heard that. That big head, water head.
My internet, I got the Obama internet. I don't have Obama internet. I have AT&T, but I don't know what's going on with it. So I didn't even really get to hear what he said. So y'all go ahead and tell me what you thought about it.
He said the NAACP wasn't they wasn't, I guess, radical enough. They were too calm. I read a letter one time at this museum in Atlanta where King was upset with the NAACP, telling them they weren't doing enough. And back in my backsliding days, I thought that the letter that he wrote was King was kind of, I said, okay, he got some spunk, he got some fight. Boy, was I wrong. You know what I'm saying? I was wrong.
You gotta take the S off, Chad. Take the S off the spunk. That's he was the punk. He was
the punk. Yeah, now the NAACP, they used to call back in even as recent as the 50s. They called the NAACP the private attorney general for Black America. And a lot of the things that the NAACP was doing, I mean, you had a lot of legal minds across the country, and it was all sorts of write-ups in various law review journals, even at some Ivy League institutions that still had some integrity at that time, like Yale and some others, who were just downright just vicious and upset with the NAACP for their malfeasance and how they conducted themselves. Just completely violated centuries-old tradition of just how you went about certain things. Like, the NAACP, they would finagle and finesse certain situations just to get cases in front of the Supreme Court. And people knew exactly what they were doing, and they were trying to shape the law in order to benefit the people to whom they claimed to represent, which was Black America at large. And so they were considered the private attorney general for Black America. But yeah, the NAACP, like a lot of other organizations, would sometimes grapple and go back and forth with some other organizations for who would be the biggest, have the largest portion of sway over the minds of Black folk. But when it comes to the NAACP, of course, I take a ton away from the disclosures of Manning Johnson in terms of what the NAACP was really doing, what they were really up to. Of course, on the one hand, they will tell you that the NAACP was sort of like an alternative to the more, and it's sort of necessary, right? Because the Lenin spoke about this. Many other communists talked about this. I've really taken a lot from. I know a lot. There have been a ton of great Christian writers throughout the 20th century, and I know, when it comes to communism and what how brutal its repression, the machinery of communist repression is. When we talk about, for example, the Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. But for me, again, it's not like heralded as much as the Gulag Archipelago. But when you read the personal testimony in the memoirs of Richard Warnbrand, I talk about him a lot, when I'm on this show. He wrote the book Tortured for Christ. Again, he spent 14 years in a Romanian prison for preaching the gospel. He was a Jewish Lutheran, and when you hear about what went on in those prisons, he says that he didn't become a true Christian until he went through that experience, in the way it kind of purified him, how the pain kind of purified him. And it's a brilliant, if you read Tortured for Christ, or if you read his other memoirs called In God's Underground. And it's funny because he was in prison. He was let out after spending 8 years under some of the most brutal and sadistic torture you can ever imagine. Got out. When he went into prison, his son was 9. By the time he got out of prison, his son was a man, was an adult. He continued to do what he had been doing before he went in the first time, got arrested, and was put back in prison for crimes against the state, or whatever kind of cockamamie charges these communists would make up on you. And again, a brilliant man, one of the most influential for me in my personal life. This is just me talking. His philosophy and his outlook on life really had a huge impression. Has made a huge impression on me over the years as I read his work. And he said that, he met a man, I forgot, he was one of the high-ranking members in the Romanian Communist Party. And this guy was bragging about how because he had been a revolutionary all his life. This one guy he had met in prison. And the guy said, man, he was like, man, I've dedicated my life to the movement, to the revolution, and I ended up here. And people was like, well, why didn't you choose the side that essentially, won, right? And you can be out, right, enjoying life, and not in here, crammed in here with the rest of us, dying of tuberculosis and torture and being worked to death. And he said of the revolution, he said of Marxism, communism, he said that communism is like a thing or a body with 2 arms. He said, on the one hand, you have the democratic arm, right? Or the Fabian arm. And on the other hand, you have the more radical, the more Bolshevik arm. But they're both attached to the same thing. They're both working toward the same goal. He said, if you remove one arm, if you tear off one wing, then the entire organism is severely injured. It's severely crippled. It dies. And he was saying in so many words that he just so happened to be on the wrong side, but he felt as though he had done what it is that he needed to do for the sake of the entire movement, because someone is going to have to be sacrificed, because it has to attack the system in like a two-pronged pincer formation, so to speak, where you have those who are more overtly radical and those who are working within the system to try to overthrow it. And that's what I think about, man, when I think of MLK and a lot of the things that he was doing. His was the more Fabian branch. The NAACP was the more the kind of Fabian, the soft wing of the revolution, so to speak. But they were still working towards the same end, because the NAACP really began to expand its popularity in the wake of the Scottsboro Boys case, when they were butting heads with the International Defense League, the IDL, which was the legal wing of the Communist Party here in America. But the NAACP was just as corrupt as the IDL. They just didn't brand themselves a communist organization. But yeah, it was still dangerous nonetheless.
Does that that analogy of, you have the body, and then you have the one wing, the Democratic wing, and then the
revolutionary,
right, the revolutionary wing. That's kind of like the idea. I guess I don't understand the concept of, if one part of it gets cut off, the whole thing is done, because I feel like it's been wounded in the past. Like, I feel like we just did it kind of a wound. We just wounded communism in America with Trump. But the left, they haven't stopped. We've wounded them. Like, I don't see it dead. I don't know if I understand that.
To me, it means more so like, if you look at King, for example, in that clip, when he says that the riots are the language of the unheard, right? You have King, he's going to the White House, he's meeting with LBJ, right? He's doing these kinds of things. And on the other hand, people look at the Black liberation of the Black nationalist movement. This was the next phase, the next step in the democratic revolution, I think, were the words Bettina Aptheker used. And so once MLK was assassinated, and then the riots broke out in 1968, and that pretty much marked the peak, or the beginning of the insane popularity of the vanguard, the Viet Cong, as I like to call them, of the American left, which was the Black Panther Party. Even say, for example, someone like when Eldridge Cleaver, for example, when they ambushed those officers, which resulted in the high-speed chase that eventually led to the standoff, which eventually led to the killing of little Bobby Hutton. That when you hear King and he says those things, it's like a bargaining chip. It's a negotiating tool. It's, well, give us control over the levers of power, or else you're going to have to deal with the urchin in the street, right? Give me something that I can take back to them, because if you don't give me something that I can take back to them, then, right, I'm going to unleash the hordes.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have the street element, and then you have the kind of sophisticated intellectual elitist wing at the top. And so, especially when you're talking a country like the United States, right? This cold, violent overthrow of the society, you can't do that. You can't do that in the same way that the Bolsheviks were able to do it in Russia during a war. Russia had been engaged in conflict after conflict for the greater part of 20, 30 years, going back to the war with Japan, what they call it, the Russo-Sino conflict, or whatever it's called. And just the way Tsar Nicholas handled the way he prosecuted those wars, he mismanaged them so poorly, and so many Russians had lost their lives. And again, I think the war was those wars were the final straws that broke the camel's back. But there was a lot of stuff, of course, that was going on even prior to in Russia. But Russia was a weak country. It was a weak country. It was teetering on, and all it took was a slight push to completely knock it over. And I don't think that was the case, right? In the United States, you can't just, take over and that's what the radicals in the late 60s, early 70s, and the Weather Underground and these types, they thought that the revolution was evident, and that now was the time, in fact, to take up arms. So, the time for talking was over. And then what did we see, Quisha? We saw all these radicals. Many of them even went into Democrat Party politics, but the other portion of them, of course, went to education. Right? They all became, university professors, etc. Right? And so that's what I sort of think is meant, right? It's like you kind of damn if you do.
A militaristic side.
Yeah, you have a militaristic side. You're damned if you do. You're damned if you don't. You hear people when they talked about the riots in 2020, all that stuff, and then with the election coming up, and they're like, yeah, you see, this potentially could push someone like Joe Biden, right, into the White House, because this is the Democrat Party constituency, the folks that are out there and in the streets and tearing things up, and those carrying the pride flags and the vagina hats and all of that stuff. So so that's what I think is kind of meant by that, right?
No,
there's a spiritual. I'm sorry, Quisha. Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. I was just being silly.
I was gonna say that's how there's a spiritual underpinning to all this, because even when you were talking about the bird, with the two wings, if you think about how the physical body works, most people treat the body like each part is in a vacuum, right? So they don't suspect that the reason why maybe they're having heart problems is because they're pre-diabetic. They don't know that all of these nerves and how you pump blood and all of that is connected. So if you cut off one wing, you're severing arteries. So you're right, Quisha, it may not completely die, but what it does is it gets first aid from unwitting suspects, and then it creates a new body, right? So the wing might be, it might have a stick, it might be taped up, but it actually gets pumped up, it gets fed new blood. And the proof of that is, just look at how, and this is when I'm gonna get a bit in Blanchard's territory with the so-called conspiracy, because I'm a firm believer that if you go back in history, like the same way we've all learned about MLK, and we had to kind of go, oh my God, that wasn't true, right? And it kind of blew your mind. Well, you can't stop there. When you start looking at these governing entities, you have to ask yourself, and Quisha, you kind of said this earlier, how are we believing in God, but then we're also victims? Like, which one is it? But and then now to Blanche's point about Pavlov's dog, all these things work together. It's I've got to create the problem, and then I supply the what do you call it? The answer, right?
The antidote,
yeah. So if you keep, Blanche said earlier that all Black people think alike. They think like for the most part, we all see ourselves, and it is kind of like bred into you. When you're a child, you'll hear your family say, why do you always got to make us look bad? You hear stuff like that. And you're like, who is us? Right. So you already are kind of taught to not think as an individual. Now broaden that out to the larger community. Now broaden that out to the nation. Now broaden that out to multiple countries. Right. My husband is from St. Lucia. It's a Black owned country. Do you know they had a Black Lives Matter march? Make it make sense. They had a white man that was the prime minister that was born and raised there, had the accent and everything. He was actually trying to teach Black people there, listen, when you make your money and you're like doing these different food stands and whatever, let's find a way to make it legal so you can actually have a profitable business. He was helping them to get a leg up. They didn't want that. They were like, we don't want a white man running us anymore. Their economy was flourishing and everything. They got a Black guy. The Black guy is signed, sealed, and delivered over to the UN. He's talking about fixing the environment. This is St. Lucia, y'all. It's an island. Okay. He's got them with the global warming crap. Black people are doing worse than they ever been before, and now they're crying. Crime is exponentially higher. And y'all, we've seen this repeated 1,000 times over. So you have to ask yourself, why would people, you guys were talking about how people can't accept, who Martin Luther is, even when they hear it, because emotionally they're too bought in. Right? To deny what they've been told, to deny their cognitive dissonance would mean they have to change what they do henceforth, and they'd have to accept that everything they ever believed was a lie. And some folks just can't do that because they're content to wear the old slipper even though it stinks because it's comfortable.
Yes.
Yes.
You know, change is really hard for human beings. I use this example all the time. Someone can walk into a doctor's office and they say, if you don't stop smoking today, you're going to die. And that person will walk out of that office and light up a cigarette. Like, it is very hard once we get in. What is that quote? It's easier to fool someone than to actually let the person know that they have been fooled, to reveal to them that this whole thing was a lie. Like, it is the psychological. This is why I say the Democrat Party is a cult. And I say the party because that's where all of these things tend to, it's the structure on which these things are able to go out into the nation and the world. But people's minds are so, with all of these things happening at the same time. You got the sexual revolution, you got the civil rights movement, you got the abortion stuff, you got the feminism. What's that?
No, I said gay liberation and these kind of things.
All
The
of these things
feminist
were
movement by the
happening.
early 70s.
Yes, the propaganda that came out with it, the social engineering, the universities, it is so layered on that sometimes my heart does go out to people. I was one of those people. It is only the grace of God that I am not still caught up in that thing. Like, that I'm not a bliggity no more. Your girl is free.
You have to want truth though, because I used to be into slam poetry and I was pro blackity black. I was I was the light skin trying to be accepted by the black crowd, right? So I had to be
poetry, Abby.
No, well, okay, I have a question. Stop it,
Oh, that makes me laugh, man, because I was just recently I was just recently reading some of this man is so vile and reprehensible, and he's
Michael-Eric Dyson.
No, not Michael-Eric Dyson. We're talking about old school. This was the guy who Cornel West. He was one of Cornel West's idols. Mary Baraka. I was reading some of his old work, some of his poetry. This man was a complete. I mean, it's hard to find words to describe how vile he was, and he was a darling amongst the intelligence. They loved him, And this man, after Malcolm's assassination, he took this vow to depart from white society. He was born. His born name is Everett Leroy Jones. Then he changed his name to Leroy Jones with an I. And then he converted to Islam and changed his name to Amiri Baraka after Malcolm X's assassination. That's when he divorced his Jewish wife and his two mixed children to become a Muslim. And then he started. I mean, if you read some of his work, some of his poetry, he had this play that he had wrote, which was really propelled him to fame, called The Dutchman. The stuff he used to write, I mean, he was so brilliant. He was such an intellectual. He was so that's what I thought of because I was just reading Amiri Baraka recently, and Abby said she used to write slam poetry.
Yeah, I was a clown. I was trying to get on my Erykah Badu. Y'all don't even understand.
Oh God!
He was like, "Girl, stop." So,
right? Stop.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that there's a spiritual.
Stop with the organic deodorant, y'all.
Yeah. You stink. Stop.
Okay.
Right.
You need aluminum.
Right.
So with Barack Obama, so I've always thought that Barack was. Oh, I'm sorry. What's up?
No, go ahead.
I've always thought that he suffered from that. I call it complex too, with the or being like very light skinned or biracial, and it's like the Nicole Hannah Jones, like, why you got to be so extra, girl? Like,
Quisha, I need you to back off the
Ebony,
light skins.
tell me, like, what is like, what is that? Like, what is what is that?
Because it goes back to the whole you're so here goes that like intra confusion, right? So you got black people blaming white people, but then you got black people with a little more melanin that think that, and Keisha, you're gonna get this because we see videos all the time with the 3B hair and like where that crap came from, right?
Oh yeah,
they got dark skinned women on YouTube talking about light skinned women don't know what it's like, as if every light skinned woman they got light skinned women with some nappy hair. And they got some dark skin women.
They got the nigglet features.
Yes.
They like it, but they got the nigglet features.
Maybe
hair texture is not directly correlated to your melanin. It's so stupid. Right. But within the black community, y'all already know, I'm not part of the community, so I'm speaking from a distance. But the black community treats light-skinned people like y'all don't know about the struggle. You get accepted as a European people. That's like, which is not, my mama is blacker than Quisha and Blanche put together. So it's crazy. I mean, darker melanin. But I want to read this to y'all real quick because on that note, a couple people have said in the somebody said jambalaya, y'all got $2 for me to not do the poetry. I just want y'all to know that. But President Obama, this is the White House archives.gov. It says President Obama believes we need to restore security and opportunity for working Americans with the fundamental values that made our economy the strongest in the world. Line. Making sure everyone does their fair share. Y'all know that language. Everyone gets a fair shake, and hard work and responsibility are rewarded. That's why President Obama has worked to improve the lives of all Americans, including African Americans. Okay, drop down. You're going to see that he talked about helping all Americans, but why, oh, why did I pull up a few little things he said on LGBT? He says, thank you so much, all of you. It is a privilege to be here tonight to open for Lady Gaga. I've made it. I want to thank the Human Rights Campaign for inviting me to speak and for the work you do every day in pursuit of equality on behalf of millions of people in this country who work hard in their jobs and care deeply about their families who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. This is the key point. For nearly 30 years, you've advocated on behalf of those without a voice. That's not easy. For despite the real gains that we've made, there's still laws to change and there's still hearts to open. There are still fellow citizens, perhaps neighbors, even loved ones, good and decent people who hold fast to outworn arguments, old attitudes, who fail to see your families like their families, and who would deny you the rights. I don't know how we're denying anybody rights. Most Americans take for granted. And he goes on to talk about fairness and equality, blah, blah, blah. Okay, then I pull up a few things he says on Islam. I come here to Cairo to seek a new beginning between the United States and Muslims around the world, one based on mutual interest and mutual respect, and one based upon the truth that America and Islam are not exclusive and need not be in competition. Instead, they overlap and share common principles. We know that's not true. Principles of justice and progress, tolerance, and the dignity of all human beings. Now, I just read earlier. Yes. And he talks about it can't happen overnight. But there's one particular line that I like, and I actually found a scripture to combat it. He says, but I am convinced that to move forward, we must say openly to each other the things we hold in our hearts, and that too often are said only behind closed doors. There must be a sustained effort to listen to each other, to learn from each other, to respect one another, and to seek common ground. Remember the speech I read from the 1800s when he said we all have to unify, we have to be inseparable in thought? Okay. He says, now he quotes the Holy Quran, holy, he calls holy. As the Holy Quran tells us, be conscious of God and speak always the truth. So to be conscious of God is no different than just saying, I believe he exists, whoever he is. But scripture, Romans 1:21, counters that. And it says, although they knew God, they did not honor God as God or thank him. Instead, their reasoning became pointless and their foolish hearts were darkened. So the spiritual underpinning is them trying to create a global system where we are all netizens, and they use race and gender and sexual identity as a way to kind of create the division based on palpable, vulnerable things that have always been there because people are different. But then they're going to actually converge to make them merged as one thing. You can see it in real time. So what people do unknowingly is they feed into where the diversions and the divisions are that aren't really real, right? And instead of looking at, I'll use this analogy really quick. If you go outside at the same time as your neighbor, okay, and you're feeding your dog and he's feeding your dog. There's two dogs, okay? After a while, that dog comes to expect you and the neighbor coming out at the same time to eat. This is going to Blanche's Pavlov. But let's say the dogs are only looking at the fact that the snacks are dropped on the ground. They're not looking at the hand that's dropping it. What if you start coming out and you give only food to one dog and not the other? The other dog is going to whine and cry. After a while, he's going to tear the other dog's eyes out. Because the whole time the dogs are not paying attention that there are two people that are responsible for giving them the scraps. Instead, they kill each other. That's exactly what's happening here. And that's why people don't pay attention. They're too busy looking at the other dog and what they're doing.
That just really, I'm sorry, just really quick. That and it's getting late for me. I got to wrap it up soon. But that is another reason why I say that Obama was more dangerous or is more dangerous, because remember when MLK started to talk about, it went from like Black people to all poor people. He was like trying to expand his base. That is what Obama was able to do. So it wasn't just, and I know these ideas have been around and people had been writing about them, and it wasn't a new idea or anything like that. But it couldn't just be about Black people. Yeah, I'm Black and I'm the president. But now it is every person who's not a white male Christian, basically. I mean, that is essentially who became the other. You know, it was like us, the minorities, the African Americans, and in that clip, it was like African Americans and other minorities. It's got to be, we're expanding the victimhood, because it can't just be one person anymore. Like America is just, we're multicultural. We're broader now. That's you know, and so now we got to make new victims. We have to make new victims of our for our agenda. And so that expansion of, you know, it being not just about, you know, civil rights is not just for Black people. Now it's for the women, it's for you know, all of these other groups, when kind of it was kind of solidified in our minds, like, okay, civil rights, Black folks. You know what I mean? It's like, no. It's not that. And hence where we are today.
Right.
That's why I said you have to abolish the Civil Rights Act. To me, if we wanted to, and this can be like my last like statement, but if to gut this whole thing, you have to abolish the Civil Rights Act. Now, I know that is extremely controversial to say. I tweeted that one time on Twitter. I was like, oof, yeah, people don't like to hear that. But I don't see any other way to end this. You have to abolish the Civil Rights Act. There is no other way to do it.
Yeah, but you know, of course, I think you're absolutely right. But you know, before we can even get to that point, I mean, you know, people need a radical, I hate to use the term radical, but I mean, context is everything, right? Perception is everything. They need a radical mind shift change. I mean, their whole worldview has to be turned around and flipped 180 degrees on its ear. Because when you use the term civil rights, again, like I mentioned on this platform many different times, the word civil itself stems from the Latin civus. You have to understand, or have to have a firm foundation and a firm conception of what it even means to be a citizen. Because most people take for granted how, in fact, civilizations are made and how civilizations are forged and how they're formed. What constitutes a citizen and what responsibility do citizens have? And as a result, what rights do those said citizens have once they firmly understand their duties, their rights, and their responsibilities? You can be a resident, or you can I guess dwell within the political confines of any given territory. But what exactly does it mean to be a citizen? In the throes of the French Revolution, even the French came up with this concept of what they call active citizens versus passive citizens. In order to be an active citizen, right, you had to have certain things. You had to have certain things in place. And in due time, in France, especially, this is why what they call universal male suffrage began in France in the 1700s, and then that eventually became, women's suffrage in other parts of the world, particularly here in the United States, because you had men in France who were like, "Well, I want to vote too." It's like, nah, everybody can't do that. You know what I mean? And you had, and this was a huge problem. I don't want to unpack all of the gripes between North and South during the period of the 1860s, but this was a huge part of what upset a lot of Southerners due to the interference of Northern carpetbaggers who were coming in and rejiggering and restructuring the voting systems in these various Southern states, and they wanted certain, restrictions, right, based upon whether or not someone was competent, or whether someone was literate, and so there were a lot of things that were involved in that. And when you push for this mass enfranchisement, what you do, of course, is you broaden the ability of this proletariat to influence society in a way that it didn't have to, or it didn't have the ability to do prior to. And this is part of the reason. It goes back, ironically, to what I was talking about when I was talking about how you have the democratic wing of the revolution, and you have the violent, the kind of Bolshevik wing versus the Fabian wing of the revolution, because even Friedrich Engels was quite impressed by this mass enfranchisement across various Western countries, where prior to, not everyone had access to the franchise, because he said that this is how the proletariat can take over, not by violent means, but we can do so through political action. And when we gain the levers of power, we could create what Friedrich Engels referred to as a proletarian constitution. We won't even have to pick up a gun, right? I'm gonna read just a brief description of the man I mentioned earlier, Albert Brisbane. Just briefly, his beliefs when it came to capitalism and socialism and these things. Just a couple of sentences. It says here, and I'm pulling this directly from Wikipedia. It says of Brisbane here, just this one small portion. It says Brisbane argued that the remedy to society's ills lay in the adoption of more efficient forms of production, based upon the principle of harmony of the owners of capital and those employed by them. He did not envision the elimination of the role of capitalism, but rather the regulation of distribution of the product of labor between capitalist and worker on a more equitable basis. So that's the Fourierian, the Charles Fourierianismness in him. Right. I mean, he was a follower, like I said, of Charles Fourier, as opposed to the more radical socialist and Henri Saint-Simon, because he had went on. This is Albert Brisbane, to denounce Saint-Simon. But I think that we need to begin really questioning this idea, and this is why a lot of even Andrew Johnson, right, the man who took over after after Abraham Lincoln's assassination, thought that a lot of the language in these new bills and amendments were quite vague, and he feared what the very thing that we're talking about now. There were smart men in the room back then who feared that this sort of thing would happen. So when Quisha's talking about, like, all creating new victimhood, creating new categories of victims, it reminds me again of something that even like what Malcolm X talked about back in the 1960s after his dismissal from the Nation of Islam, right? When he took on a more active role in geopolitics, right? He wanted to create this broad, right, international band of countries forged and held together by this animus and this hatred toward European imperialism. Because even, Malcolm X said it himself. He said that when you look at whites in America, yes, the whites are the majority in America, but globally they're the minority. So all non-white folks must band together to throw off the chains of European imperialism. And to go back to what Ebby talked about when she's talking about her husband and what's happening in his native country. This is the same exact thing that happened in a lot of countries in Africa, right? I mean, they went the way of socialism, right, as opposed to classical liberalism, i.e. free markets and these sorts of things. And this is why a lot of these countries still suffer to this very day, right? And I was just laughing too. He's talking about the light skin stuff. A lot of this stuff began with Du Bois and Garvey. I'll probably do a whole YouTube talk on Marcus Garvey because I think Garvey really needs to be exposed even more so than Blanchard and I exposed Marcus Garvey about 1.5 years ago when he and I did that live together. But I just wanted to mention that. And lastly, the reason why I brought up the death of Bobby Hutton was because Eldridge Cleaver had ambushed those police officers in Oakland, which eventually led to that standoff that resulted in the death of little Bobby. And Eldridge Cleaver would later go on 17 years later and admit to a journalist by the name of Kate Coleman, who's wrote a lot of good pieces on exposing the Black Panther Party. He admitted openly that he did, in fact, ambush those cops, and they weren't chased down by a group of racist cops who were just looking to hassle members of the Black Panther Party. He said that he provoked that attack, and he did so in response to the assassination of MLK. He stated in his own words that they wanted revenge. And so this is part of that, this revenge seeking. And
what basically saying is we can't believe none of these Black people when they tell these stories. All of them lying.
Yeah, all of them lying. And G. I mean, I'm really going to expose Marcus Garvey for what he was. But I just someone in the chat. And I know Quisha has to get out of here. This guy, G. Birch, he asked a question. He said, toward the end of his life, MLK did speak more and more against poverty in the U.S. and against militarism. He said, but how did that make him a Marxist? So before I could even answer that question, I would ask G. Birch, well, what does he mean when he says King began to speak more and more against poverty? What does it mean to speak against poverty? Notice how we've cheapened language so much so to where we take so much for granted that we don't even understand the words we're using and what it implies and what it actually means. It just becomes a platitude for one to kind of feign virtue. What does it mean to speak against poverty? Mm-hmm. You're born poor, right? Wealth creation is the aberration. Poverty doesn't have to be explained. How do you fight against or speak against poverty? What does that mean? And what does that mean to speak against U.S. militarism? What is U.S. militarism exactly? What does that mean? Right? In the height of the Cold War, right? During the heyday of Soviet imperialism. What are we talking about? Mm-hmm. I would just ask G. Birch to really rethink how he's framing his questions. It just goes to show you. And I'm not saying that because I'm trying to argue with him or come for him. He asked a fair question. But just think about how much we've cheapened language where we just say things that don't really have any real meaning. Mm-hmm. What do you mean speak against poverty? What does that mean?
Yeah. And if you really look at his writings and his speeches, I would say he was a socialist, but not, an open one. He was more socialist, even though he had Marxist tendencies. That's my reading.
Yeah. Yeah, it was socialism through welfarism, right? That's why I say that Dr. King, I referred to him as a Fabian socialist. Even his theological mentor, Walter Rauschenbusch, was a trained Fabian socialist, and he integrated a lot of these. And he went to England proper and studied under the Fabian Society, where he learned a lot of these ideas, and he implemented a lot of his quote unquote economic critiques into his whole theological outlook when he wrote the Christianity in the Social Crisis, which was the book that helped to shape MLK's worldview, in his own words, in writing a letter to his then girlfriend, Coretta Scott, that the social gospel would be the gospel that he would preach to the world. Those are his words.
I wanted. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Blanche.
You want to do these super stickers?
Yes, and then we're gonna play one more clip and just have a brief summarization, and we're out.
All right. Thank you, DT, for the super sticker. Really appreciate it. Anthony's Too Real. Quisha, were you at Sam's Club earlier?
I was. So yeah, in the chat she says she and her husband saw me, and they didn't want to come up and say hey. Well, next time say hey.
Yeah. They didn't want you to ask them to pay for your stuff. Anyway, Willie Doc, I find it interesting that people say BLM, current day Black Marxism, etc., is separate from MLK/civil rights because it didn't originate from the church. It's all from the same evil, idolatrous root.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mark. Yeah, communists infiltrated the church a long time ago.
Thank you, Shelly Day, for the super sticker. Thank you, Mr. James. Victory will be found in Black Media Company. The war is in the mind. Faith in the machine is low. Stories are our greatest weapon. Stay blessed. And I think what he was talking about was, I think he was talking about Black conservatives, I guess, or what having content that is like more entertaining versus, I guess, education.
Yeah, that's one thing, because conservatives are bad at entertainment, and they're bad for a reason. Now, that's a totally separate conversation. Maybe that's a conversation for another day. Why conservative and why Christians? I think a lot of Christians make bad art. I have my own personal opinion as to why they fail. But anyway, I won't open up that can of worms because we're almost out here. Say that for another time.
Martin Towns, I ain't no bliggity no more. I'm delivered.
I'm delivered. Women.
Willie Doc for Jambalaya to give us some slam poetry, $2. Y'all gonna need more than that. $2.
That's my value, I guess.
Right. The new me, Michela. It's been a while since I've caught the show. Much love, you guys. What's up, Michela? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Shelly Day again. We were all blackety black at one point. God woke us up, and I thank God for doing that. Amen. Thank you. And then Saving Effective Podcast. Sounds like you're describing the Black Army. I don't remember what that was in reference to.
Right, I don't know what that was in reference to.
All right, we're going to play this clip real quick.
There's only so much a church can do to help all the families in need. All those who need help making a mortgage payment or avoiding foreclosure or making sure their child can go to college. There's only so much that a nonprofit can do to help a community rebuild in the wake of disaster. There's only so much the private sector will do to help folks who are desperately sick get the care that they need. And that's why I continue to believe that in a caring and in a just society, government must have a role to play. That our values, our love, and our charity must find expression not just in our families, not just in our places of work and our places of worship, but also in our government and in our politics.
So I played that clip because, he's talking about all of these biblical principles, but he's like, no, but pointing people to the government for these things instead of, to his newfound faith that he believed in. But then yet at 63, he was still questioning. But that's a whole nother thing. It's like, he needs to get it together, bro. But that is the thing. That's how people think. We have been so conditioned to think that there is nothing within us, that God cannot work within us to achieve the what God has put in our life to has purposed us to do in the earth. Like as if it's difficult for God, as if it's, somehow like that didn't come with the package or something. Like I don't understand. And I know Obama's not really Christian, so I'm not really talking about him. I'm talking about the people, the regular everyday people who repeat these things and never bother to question what people like Barack Obama are pointing you to. Like we don't stop to think, like, what the heck is he actually saying? Like Chuck asked the guy, the G. Birch guy, what exactly is what exactly are you saying? What exactly is this pushback? We don't stop to question these things. I've been listening to Barack and just people in history and speeches and stuff like that. And I'm like, I am shocked at how many things that people say in public that very few people actually be like, that is crazy that they said that. Like once they have solidified themselves, the media has made them into like, the image that you're supposed to worship. It's like people don't question anything anymore. And this is the last thing I'll say. I think I'm pretty sure that is how people are going to be deceived. Like when Jesus is like about to come back, the deception is going to be so good. You can already see it. People don't question anything. Here, put this jab in your arm. I'm not going to tell you what's in it. Just take it, shut up, and be happy. I'm sorry, what the freak? Like y'all just make me start cussing and stuff. Like that is insane. That is insane. And so my prayer is that
don't do it, Quisha. Don't curse. Don't do it.
I ain't gonna cuss. I ain't gonna cuss or curse. But it's sad for me. It hurts my heart because I was there. God set me free, and I want people to be set free from this because it's so much better on this side. Like when you can't see anything, when you're deceived, it's like it cuts you off from truth. You can't, like, it could be right in front of you. You won't see it. You won't see it. And so that's my prayer, is that people stop falling for this, stop being led by our emotions and stuff like that. And because there's nothing good there. There's no benefit. You will be led astray. The enemy knows how you work. Okay, he know what you like. He know what you like to hear. All those stuff. He's gonna come with stuff that sounds really good to your ears. So,
and can I just say this? So you said that Obama is a Christian, and that's the problem. Is that he represents Christianity, and I believe that Christianity itself is a tool of the enemy because Christianity is not biblically based. It's a way to be socially it's a way to make God's word, quote unquote, socially acceptable. And the problem is that God's word will never be accepted in society because it goes against the world. It would be like oil and vinegar, or whatever they say, oil and water trying to mix. And so the problem is that when Barack Obama says he's a Christian, it resonates because that's how most Christians are. They're not really rooted in biblical scripture. They're rooted in what sounds good, what appears to be good. So when the guy says, well, he spoke out against poverty, Kaepernick said that he wanted to bring awareness to police brutality. But what does that actually even mean? What it means is you're saying that police brutality is a problem, poverty is a problem. I think he mentioned something else I forgot. But anyway, these things are problems. Okay, well, who's causing these problems? If every person is born in this world on their own, then who's causing you to be born into poverty? Is it your parents? Of course not. Your community? Of course not. It's going to be a source. And so when we talk about these things of who we're talking about, who are these people talking about? They're at the end of the day talking about white people. If you go back to poverty, they're going to say, okay, well, who runs this? They're going to go back from the mayor to the governor to the corporations. It's always going to be okay. And like Chuck said, Malcolm was like, it's more of us than them. So we all got to come together to do what? Unify to do what? To go against them. This is the same spirit that exists with Nimrod in the Tower of Babel is that we got to come together to do what? To challenge God. So again, what are we doing all of this stuff for? And like you said, Quisha, people don't ask the question why, because the why is, to me, the character question. Why are we doing this? Why gonna get you to the answer? Because, okay, why, the guy I mentioned earlier, the D4 guy, he said, well, I thought King was more of a, how was King communist when he believed in something he said? Again, why did he believe this? Somebody in my chat was like, well, I thought King was a Christian. Well, why do you think that? You see, to me, and you mentioned this, Quisha, people don't ask why because deep down inside, they don't really want the answer. Because the truth is going to require you to make a tough decision. Once I know the truth, now I'm held to account of doing what is right versus doing what is wrong. So, you know, on Judgment Day, many folks going to say, well, I didn't know. They didn't tell me. I was black. I was oppressed. They tricked me. I was born in the wrong body. I
had no boots.
All of this stuff they're going to say, and God going to be like, depart from me. I did not know you. So I just think that these people, Quisha, again, we mentioned about King and MLK. The problem really is that they're both Christians. King and Barack Obama are, because think about it, they're people that are beloved in most churches. Even though we know they're not, most churches love MLK and they love Obama. So
I have to say this really, really quick, just because look at Jamal Bryant. Look at all the people that go there. This man literally advocates for abortion, homosexuality, got a Marxist fist. People might not know what that means. But what is that? Why is that? The cross. Right. Okay, what is that about?
I'm squeezing the cross. That's what he's saying. I'm squeezing the cross.
Right.
I'm about to kill it.
All of these things, you want to put weed in the church and all this kind of stuff, sell weed or whatever.
Sell weed,
and
right?
You're not thinking that maybe this man is not really coming from what he says he's of. Like there's
it's mostly women in there. It's mostly women.
Yes.
Really real women. What were they? The truth is sharper than any two-edged sword. That's what the Bible says. When that truth come on you, sometimes it hurts, and people do not want to endure that pain.
So I like now I'm done for submission, and I think I might have some answer to the question of the why.
Okay,
it goes to self-preservation. Scripture says that you're not supposed to love your life and try to preserve it. You're supposed to seek to lose your life because your life is hidden in Christ. And Romans 1:28 says, and since they did not see fit to acknowledge God or consider him worth knowing as their creator, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do things which are improper and repulsive. So self-preservation, trying to maintain a little corner of utopia here for as long as you can, instead of accepting that your life here is a vapor anyway. You're not supposed to try to sustain your life here. You're supposed to sustain it in Messiah. And when you figure that out, nothing anybody tells you, whether they're going to give it to you or not, they're going to make your life better or worse, right? Of course, we like Trump over Kamala, but I would even say to the conservatives, the fact that some conservatives drop all their peace and hope because Trump might err in a direction that they don't like tells you that their faith is in the cult of personality, not the policies that may be written. So even on our side, a lot of that exists. If your life is hidden in Christ, no man can take anything from you anyway. Therefore, you don't hope in man. Period. Point blank.
Amen.
Period. As they say.
And I guess I'll say my goodbyes. I had a quick little couple of verses I wanted to read. Abby just kind of stole, but it's okay. I guess I'll do the same. I just want to say to Barack Obama in that clip, it's funny. He says that he talks about the role of government. He says that the private sector can't provide you with all that you need. Never mind the fact that the government is not a self-generating entity when it comes to revenue, right? I mean, the government itself relies upon the private sector, right? They think it's their responsibility to allocate the products and services produced by the private sector in a manner that is more equitable or in a manner that's fair In other words, they're taking from those who do not vote for them and giving the properties of said folk to those who do in fact support them. But never mind the fact that both the private sector and the public sector are comprised of what? Human beings. So I love how you can't trust the private sector. Right? And a lot of Black folks will tell you this, to talk about racism, this, that, and the third, and the white man, but they rely upon that same white man to implement and execute his laws justly and fairly. So the white man, his racism has control over you in the private sector. And so you want to create laws and legislations to make sure that he doesn't exercise, that he doesn't indulge in his racist proclivities at your expense, right? And so you're going to rely upon the white man in government to police the white man in the private sector who do bad things. It just goes to show you this has nothing to do. This is about something completely different, But Obama thinks that because people are in government, they somehow become more moral or more virtuous, right? Like I like what Milton Friedman says that, do you know any society says that? Why is it that all of a sudden when a person becomes an elected official, Milton Friedman, I just love the way he talks. He said, what, does a person become less greedy when they become in the government? What happens? They become less greedy? Seriously, they become less greedy when they become a public official? I don't think so, right? Because greed is greed. Greed is a human trait. But to Jamal Bryan and to Barack Obama, it reminds me of. I'll go here and I'll close out here. I'll go to 2 John. I think 2 John is the shortest book in the Bible. But 2 John here in verse 7. I'll start there. It says that. I say this because many deceivers who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh have gone out into the world. He's speaking to the Gnosticism and a lot of the heresies that were around at the time, because you have the Gnostics who didn't believe that, right, that God came down in the flesh. Well, we don't have time to unpack Gnosticism, but I think a lot of us know what it is. Any such person is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch out that you do not lose what we have worked for, but that you have been rewarded fully. Anyone who runs ahead and does not continue in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever continues in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not take them into your house and welcome them. And I think John is speaking about the church, because they didn't have churches. People talked about Jesus in their homes. That's where people kind of gather for what we call church today. So this is what he means. Don't take them into your church. Anyone who welcomes them shares in their wicked work. So let that be a warning to all you folks out there. I may not know everything again, but I think that it's paramount that you at least understand the nature of God. You understand that God is triune, and that Jesus, the Son of God, is God, and all that other good stuff, and dispense with all the modalism and all the other heresies. Even some of your favorite conservatives who say such crazy things about Jesus not being the Messiah and so on and so forth. I won't name names. These people are nothing against them, but they're wrong. And so anyone who welcomes them shares in their wicked work. So you've been warned.
Amen. Agreed. Great scripture. Blanche, did you have anything else to say?
Oh, no, I just enjoyed today's show. Thanks, Abby, for coming on.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Anytime I can see an ex-obligity, it brings my heart full. Right.
And a light-skinned ex-obligity at that. We're like leprechauns. Y'all don't know.
It's hard. Listen, it's hard to get a light skin and not be obligity, because that's what they cling to. Listen, that's all we got.
Once we get accepted in the dark community, we don't want to let that
go. Listen, interrupt. This was a great episode. I really think. I
enjoyed this.
Yeah, it was good. I think it was like kind of a, like Chuck said, it's like six one way, half a dozen the other when we're comparing the two. But I think what it evolved into was really, really good. I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But thank you guys so much for watching. We will be back on Sunday, 7:30-ish. Thank you to the chat and all the super stickers and supporting the channel. Remember, there's memberships as a way you can support. Keep a lookout for all the projects that Chad O. Jackson is working on. He's doing a phenomenal job. I don't know if you guys follow him on Instagram. If you don't, please follow him because he's putting clips up there. Follow all of us if you care to. But thank you for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.